London, 1888. A fog-choked night at the Grand Lyceum Theatre. The curtain rises, and Maestro Enrico Velluti's marionettes dance with eerie life, captivating a breathless audience. Then a flicker of shadow, a tangle of strings, and Velluti vanishes mid-performance, leaving only a cryptic note. The strings are cut. Where has the master puppeteer gone? Why does a hidden trapdoor lead to a blood-streaked chamber? Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson plunge into a web of secret societies, forbidden machines and puppets that seem to watch their every move. Is Velluti a victim or the architect of a sinister plot? Unravel a mystery where every thread pulls you deeper into danger, and nothing is as lifeless as it seems. Chapter 1. The empty stage, the fog, clung to London's cobblestone streets like a reluctant ghost, swirling around the gas lamps that flickered weakly against the November chill. At 221B Baker Street, Sherlock Holmes sat in his armchair, his violin resting on his knee, its strings silent. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting shadows that danced across the cluttered room papers strewn over the table. A half-finished chemical experiment bubbling in the corner, and Dr. John Watson's open notebook, its pages filled with the latest chronicle of their adventures. Watson, seated opposite, sipped his tea, glancing at Holmes with a mix of curiosity and exasperation. "You've been staring at that violin for an hour, Holmes," Watson remarked, setting his cup down. "No case to occupy you, I presume?" Holmes' eyes, sharp as a hawk's, flicked toward him. "On the contrary, Watson, my mind is a crucible, refining the mundane into the profound. But I confess, London has been distressingly dull of late. No murder, no intrigue, only petty thefts and lost cats. Hardly worthy of my talents." Watson chuckled, accustomed to Holmes' restless genius. "Perhaps a quiet evening is a blessing. You've solved 3 cases this month alone. Even you deserve a rest." "Rest is stagnation," Holmes retorted, his fingers twitching as if itching to pluck the violin strings. "The mind thrives on problems, Watson. Without them it rusts." Before Watson could reply, a sharp rap at the door interrupted the quiet. Mrs. Hudson, their ever-patient landlady, entered, her face flushed with urgency. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, there's a gentleman here says it's a matter of life and death. He's from the Grand Lyceum Theatre." Holmes' demeanor shifted instantly, like a hound catching a scent. "Show him in, Mrs. Hudson. Life and death, you say? Perhaps London has remembered its obligation to entertain me." A moment later, a wiry man in a threadbare coat burst into the room. His name was Mr. Percival Thorne, manager of the Grand Lyceum, and his eyes were wide with panic. His hands trembled as he clutched a crumpled playbill, its edges stained with ink. "Mr. Holmes, you must come at once," he stammered. "It's Maestro Enrico Velluti, the finest puppeteer in Europe. He's vanished, sir, vanished mid-performance." Holmes leaned forward, his interest piqued. "Vanished? Explain, Mr. Thorne. Leave no detail out." Thorne mopped his brow with a handkerchief. "It was tonight's show, sir, the grand finale of Velluti's season. The theatre was packed, lords, ladies, even critics from Paris. His puppets, they're like nothing you've ever seen, moving as if alive. He was performing his masterpiece, the dance of the star-crossed, when, poof, the curtain flickered. The puppets froze, and Velluti was gone. Not a trace, not a sound. The audience thought it was part of the act at first, but then Chaos. Watson frowned. Surely he could have slipped backstage. A prank, perhaps. Thorne shook his head vehemently. Impossible, Dr. Watson. The stage is elevated, surrounded by the audience on 3 sides. The only exit is a narrow stair to the wings, guarded by my ushers. No one saw him leave. His booth, the puppet booth, was empty, save for a spilled glass of wine and a note. A note? Holmes' voice was sharp, his eyes glinting with the thrill of a puzzle. What did it say? Thorne fumbled in his pocket and produced a crumpled slip of paper, which he handed to Holmes. The detective unfolded it, his long fingers moving with precision. Written in a hurried, elegant script were the words, "The strings are cut." Holmes read it aloud, his voice low and thoughtful. Cryptic, deliberate, a message perhaps, or a taunt. Tell me, Mr. Thorne, did Veluti have enemies? Thorne hesitated. He was eccentric, sir. A genius, but private. Kept to himself, always working in his workshop below the theater. Some said he was haunted by his own creations, but enemies? None that I know of. He was adored. Holmes stood abruptly, his dressing gown swirling as he reached for his coat. Watson, my hat and scarf. We're going to the Grand Lyceum. A puppeteer vanishing in a theater full of witnesses is no mere accident. There's a game afoot, and I intend to play it. The Grand Lyceum Theatre loomed like a Gothic cathedral in the heart of London's West End, its marquee glowing faintly through the fog. Inside, the auditorium was a sea of velvet seats and gilded balconies, now eerily silent. The stage, still set for Veluti's performance, was a frozen tableau. Marionettes dangled from their strings, their painted faces caught in mid-expression, lovers reaching for one another, a jester frozen in a mocking grin. The puppet booth, a tall wooden structure draped in black velvet, stood at the center, its interior hidden from view. Holmes strode onto the stage, his eyes scanning every detail. Watson followed, noting the faint scent of sawdust and wax that hung in the air. The ushers, still shaken, lingered in the wings, whispering among themselves. Thorne hovered nearby, wringing his hands. This is where it happened, Mr. Holmes. He was in the booth, controlling the puppets, and then nothing. Holmes circled the booth, his movements precise, almost predatory. He ran his fingers along the velvet curtain, then knelt to examine the floor. Watson, observe, he said, pointing to a faint scuff mark near the booth's base. Fresh, irregular. Something was dragged here, or perhaps someone stumbled. He pushed aside the curtain and stepped inside the booth. The interior was cramped, cluttered with levers, pulleys, and a tangle of strings that connected to the puppets above. A small table held a toppled glass, its red wine staining the wood like blood. Holmes sniffed the glass, his brow furrowing. Claret, but with an unusual undertone, possibly laced with a sedative. Watson, your medical opinion. Watson took the glass, inhaling cautiously. There's a bitter no-chloral hydrate. Perhaps. Enough to knock a man out, but not kill him. Holmes nodded, his gaze shifting to the strings. He plucked one, and a puppet's arm jerked upward, its wooden hand curling as if in supplication. Remarkable craftsmanship, he murmured. These puppets move with a precision that borders on the uncanny. Veluti was no mere entertainer. He was an artist of rare skill. He knelt again, his magnifying glass glinting in the stage light as he examined the floorboards. Aha! He exclaimed softly, pressing his fingers against a seam. With a faint click, a section of the floor slid open, revealing a narrow trapdoor. A gust of cold air wafted up, carrying the scent of damp stone and something metallic. "Ah, hidden passage," Watson said, peering into the darkness. "But where does it lead?" "To answers, I hope," Holmes replied, his voice tinged with excitement. "Thorne, was this trapdoor part of the theater's design?" Thorne shook his head, bewildered. "Not that I know of, sir. The theater's old, built in the last century. There could be all sorts of secrets in its bones." Holmes lit a match, its flame casting flickering shadows down the narrow stone steps. "Watson, stay close. We're descending into the unknown." The passage was a claustrophobic tunnel, its walls slick with moisture. Holmes moved with the confidence of a man who thrived in shadows, his match held high. Watson followed, his hand on his revolver, though he doubted it would be much use against whatever lay ahead. The air grew colder, the metallic scent stronger, until they emerged into a small chamber beneath the theater. It was a forgotten storage room, its walls lined with dusty crates and broken props. At its center stood a single chair, its arms bound with puppet strings, as if someone had been restrained there. Holmes examined the chair, his fingers tracing the knots. "These are sailor's knots, Watson uncommon for a puppeteer. And look here." He pointed to a smudge on the floor, dark and viscous. Blood, not much, but fresh. Someone was here, and not long ago. Watson's stomach tightened. Veluti? Perhaps. Holmes said, his eyes narrowing. "But this feels staged, Watson. The note, the trapdoor, the blood, it's all too deliberate. Someone wants us to follow this trail." They searched the chamber, finding little else but a single clue, a tiny brass gear, no larger than a penny, tucked into a crack in the wall. Holmes held it up, its surface catching the matchlight. "Exquisite craftsmanship," he said. "Not theatrical. This belongs to a machine, something precise. A clock, perhaps, or something more sinister." As they climbed back to the stage, Holmes' mind was already racing, piecing together the fragments of the puzzle. The theater was silent now, the ushers gone, and Thorne waited anxiously by the booth. "What did you find, Mr. Holmes?" he asked. "Enough to know that Veluti's disappearance is no mere theatrical stunt," Holmes replied. "Someone went to great lengths to remove him, and they left a trail for us to follow. The question is, why?" Watson glanced at the puppets, their lifeless eyes staring into the void. "Do you think he's still alive?" Holmes' lips curved into a faint smile. "Oh, I think so, Watson. A man like Veluti doesn't vanish without a purpose. Whoever took him needs him for something, his skill, his knowledge, or perhaps something he's created. We'll find him, but first, we must unravel the meaning of that note. The strings are cut." As they left the theater, the fog swallowed the city once more, but Holmes' eyes burned with purpose. The game was afoot, and the empty stage was only the beginning. Chapter 2. Shadows in the workshop, the air in the Grand Lyceum Theater had grown still, the echoes of the audience's murmurs fading into the heavy silence of the empty auditorium. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson descended a narrow, creaking staircase hidden behind the stage, their footsteps muffled by a thick layer of dust. The trapdoor Holmes had discovered, cleverly concealed beneath a false floorboard, had led them into the bowels of the theater, a labyrinth of forgotten corridors. and storage rooms that seemed to pulse with secrets. The flickering gaslight in Watson's hand cast long, wavering shadows on the damp stone walls, and the faint smell of mildew clung to their clothes as they ventured deeper. Holmes, his sharp eyes scanning every detail, moved with the precision of a bloodhound on the scent. His long fingers brushed against the walls, pausing at faint scratches or smudges that might betray a hidden passage. Watson, trailing behind, clutched his revolver, though he knew it was more for his own reassurance than necessity. Holmes rarely relied on weapons when his mind was the sharpest tool at hand. "This way, Watson," Holmes said, his voice low, but commanding, as he gestured toward a heavy oak door at the end of the corridor. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of dim light spilling through the crack. "The puppeteer's workshop lies beyond. If Velluti left any clue to his disappearance, it will be here." Watson nodded, his pulse quickening. The events of the evening still weighed heavily on him. The abrupt halt of Velluti's performance, the audience's confusion turning to unease, and that cryptic note, "The strings are cut." It was unlike Holmes to take an interest in theatrical vanishings unless there was something deeper, something sinister at play. Watson trusted his friend's instincts, but the eerie atmosphere of the theater's underbelly was beginning to unsettle even his battle-hardened nerves. Holmes pushed the door open, revealing a cavernous room that seemed to swallow the light. The workshop was a chaos of creation, a testament to Maestro Enrico Velluti's genius and obsession. Shelves lined the walls, groaning under the weight of half-finished marionettes, their wooden limbs dangling like corpses in a gibbet. Tools, chisels, saws, spools of thread, and jars of paint were scattered across workbenches, some tipped over as if abandoned in haste. The air was thick with the scent of sawdust, varnish, and something sharper, almost acrid, that Watson couldn't place. "Burnt cedar," Holmes murmured, as if reading Watson's thoughts. He crouched near a workbench, his fingers brushing over a pile of charred wood shavings. "Curious, this is no ordinary fire. The burn marks are precise, controlled, as if someone used a concentrated flame, perhaps a blowtorch." Watson frowned, peering over Holmes' shoulder. A blowtorch? In a puppeteer's workshop? What would Velluti need with such a thing? Holmes didn't answer immediately. His gaze darted across the room, cataloging every detail with the speed and precision of a mechanical loom. He rose and moved to a corner where a velvet curtain hung, partially concealing a cluttered desk. With a swift motion, he pulled the curtain aside, revealing a ledger bound in cracked leather. Its pages were filled with meticulous handwriting, interspersed with cryptic symbols and diagrams that looked like a cross between musical notation and alchemical runes. "A ledger," Holmes said, flipping through the pages with a deft hand. Velluti was no mere artisan. "Look here, Watson dates, payments, and names, all encoded in a cipher. This is not the work of a man who simply carves dolls for amusement." Watson leaned closer, squinting at the unfamiliar symbols. "A cipher? Can you read it?" Holmes' lips twitched in the faintest hint of a smile. "In time. It's a substitution cipher, but layered with a secondary pattern, likely a Polybius square with a keyword." Velluti was cautious, perhaps paranoid. He was hiding something, or from someone. Before Watson could respond, a faint creak echoed through the workshop, sharp and deliberate, like the snap of a taut string. Both men froze. The sound came again, this time accompanied by a soft, rhythmic tapping, like footsteps on wood. Watson's hand tightened on his revolver, but Holmes raised a finger, signaling silence. His eyes narrowed, tracking the source of the noise to a marionette suspended from a rack across the room. Its wooden head, carved into the likeness of a grinning jester, tilted slightly, as if watching them. Did that move? Watson whispered, his voice barely audible. Holmes didn't answer. He glided toward the puppet, his movements silent and predatory. The jester's painted eyes seemed to follow him, its limbs swaying faintly, though no breeze stirred the air. Holmes reached out, his fingers hovering over the strings, when suddenly the puppet jerked violently, its arms flailing, as if yanked by an invisible hand. Watson stifled a gasp as the puppet's head snapped toward them, its wooden jaw clattering open and shut in a grotesque parody of speech. Holmes. Watson hissed, stepping back, but Holmes was already in motion. With a swift tug, he yanked the puppet from its strings, revealing a thin wire running through the rack and into the shadows above. He followed the wire with his eyes, tracing it to a concealed alcove in the ceiling. "Someone is here," he said, his voice calm but laced with urgency. "Stay sharp, Watson." No sooner had he spoken than a figure darted from the alcove, a blur of ragged clothing and bare feet. The intruder leapt to the floor, landing with the agility of a cat, and sprinted toward a side door. Holmes was faster. He lunged, seizing the figure by the collar and pinning them against a workbench. The gaslight revealed a boy no older than 12, with a dirt-streaked face and wide, frightened eyes. "Who are you?" Holmes demanded, his grip unyielding but not cruel. "And why were you spying on us?" The boy squirmed, his breath coming in short gasps. "I ain't spying. I was just watching the puppets, is all." Holmes' eyes narrowed. "A poor liar, but a quick one. You pulled the strings on that marionette to distract us. Who hired you?" The boy's defiance faltered, his gaze darting to the shadows as if expecting rescue. "Nobody," he mumbled, but his voice trembled. "I just found this place." Holmes released him, but blocked his path to the door. "You're one of Wigan's street Arabs, aren't you? I recognize the knot in your scarf, a signal for the Baker Street irregulars. But you're not one of mine. Speak, boy, or I'll have you in a cell before dawn." The boy's shoulders slumped, and he rubbed his grimy hands together. All right. Name's Tommy. I ain't with Wiggins no more. Got hired by a toff in a black cloak. Didn't give his name, but he paid me a shillin' to keep an eye on this place. Said to watch for anyone poking around the maestro's workshop." Watson stepped forward, his tone softer. "This toff, what did he look like?" Tommy shrugged. "Couldn't see much. Wore a hood, and his voice was all low and raspy, like he didn't want to be known. But he knew the maestro. Said Veluti was in trouble, that he'd crossed someone he shouldn't ve. Holmes Augean, his expression unreadable. Crossed someone. Did he say who?" Tommy shook his head. "No, just said the maestro was scared. Always looking over his shoulder. Gave me a note to deliver to him a week ago, but I never saw him after that." "A note?" Holmes' voice sharpened. "The same note we found on the stage?" Tommy nodded hesitantly. "Maybe. It said something about strings being cut. I didn't read it proper, just slipped it under his door like the toff told." Holmes exchanged a glance with Watson. The note, "The strings are cut," was no mere metaphor, it seemed. It was a warning, perhaps a threat. This man in the cloak, Holmes pressed. "Where did you meet him?" "Down by the docks, near the old warehouse district," Tommy said. "He found me, not the other way round. Paid half up front, promised more if I kept quiet." Holmes released the boy but kept his gaze fixed on him. "You've done well to tell the truth, Tommy, but you'll do better to stay out of this affair from now on. It's no game for children." Tommy nodded vigorously, his eyes wide. "I'm done with it, sir. Swear it." Holmes stepped aside, allowing the boy to scamper toward the door. As Tommy vanished into the corridor, Watson turned to Holmes. "Do you believe him?" "Enough," Holmes replied, already returning to the ledger. "He's a pawn, nothing more. But his employer, that's the thread we must follow. A man in a black cloak, operating in the shadows, hiring urchins to spy. This is no ordinary criminal." Watson rubbed his chin, still glancing at the marionette. "Rack? And Velluti? Do you think he's alive?" Holmes didn't look up from the ledger. "Alive or dead, he's at the heart of this. The trapdoor, the note, the burnt cedar all point to a carefully planned abduction, but the motive eludes me. Puppeteers, even ones as skilled as Velluti, are not typically targets of such elaborate schemes." He paused, his fingers tracing a line in the ledger. "This cipher is complex, but I've cracked the first layer. It mentions a patron someone who paid Velluti handsomely for a special commission. No name, but the sums are staggering. Hundreds of pounds for a single puppet." Watson's eyebrows shot up. "Hundreds for a toy?" "Not a toy," Holmes corrected, his tone sharp. "Velluti's creations are works of art, lifelike to an uncanny degree. But this commission was no ordinary puppet. The ledger mentions materials not found in any theater rare metals, chemicals, even references to mechanical components." Watson frowned. "Mechanical components? You mean like clockwork?" "Perhaps," Holmes said, closing the ledger with a snap. "Or something far more advanced. Velluti was no mere craftsman. He was dabbling in something dangerous, something that made him a target." The acrid smell of burnt cedar seemed to grow stronger, and Watson glanced uneasily at the charred shavings on the floor. "Holmes, that smell, it's not just cedar, is it?" Holmes' eyes gleamed in the gaslight. "Astute, Watson. There's a trace of something else, sulfur, perhaps, or a chemical accelerant. Whatever Velluti was working on, it required more than wood and paint." A sudden clatter broke the silence, and Watson spun around, his revolver drawn. A puppet had fallen from a shelf, its strings tangled, its wooden face staring blankly at the ceiling. Holmes knelt beside it, examining the intricate joints and carved features. "Exquisite craftsmanship," he murmured. "But look here, the eyes are glass, but embedded with a faint metallic sheen. Not decorative. Functional." "Functional?" Watson echoed, his unease growing. What could a puppet's eyes do? Holmes stood, his expression grim. "That, Watson, is what we must discover. Velluti's disappearance is no simple kidnapping. There's a larger design at work, and this workshop is but the first thread." The two men spent the next hour combing through the workshop, uncovering little more than additional tools and sketches of puppets with strangely detailed mechanisms. Holmes pocketed a small vial of an unknown liquid, its label smudged but hinting at a chemical compound. Watson, meanwhile, found a bundle of letters tucked behind a loose brick, all written in Italian and addressed to Velluti. Though Watson couldn't read the language, Holmes' quick glance revealed they were from a supplier in Venice, detailing shipments of rare materials, glass, steel, and something called vitreous alloy. As the clock struck midnight, Holmes closed the ledger and tucked it under his arm. "We've gleaned all we can here, Watson. The cipher will take time to fully decode, but it points to a single name, Lord Reginald Ashburn, a man of wealth and peculiar tastes. He's our next lead." Watson nodded, though his mind was still reeling from the strangeness of the workshop. "Ashburn, the collector? I've heard he's a recluse, obsessed with mechanical toys." "Precisely," Holmes said, heading for the door. "And a man with such obsessions may have a motive for silencing a puppeteer who knew too much. Come, Watson. The night is young, and London's shadows have more to reveal." As they ascended the staircase back to the theater, Watson couldn't shake the image of the jester puppet's lifeless eyes glinting in the gaslight. For the first time in years, he felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. Whatever Veluti had been working on, it was no mere performance. And whatever Holmes was chasing, it was far darker than the stage above. The streets of London were shrouded in fog as they emerged from the theater, the gas lamps casting halos of light in the mist. Holmes hailed a hansom cab, his mind already racing ahead to the next thread in the mystery. Watson climbed in beside him, his thoughts lingering on the boy Tommy and the faceless man in the black cloak. The words of the note echoed in his mind. "The strings are cut." He had a sinking feeling that those strings were tied to something far more dangerous than a missing puppeteer. The cab rattled through the cobblestone streets, carrying them toward the opulent world of Lord Reginald Ashburn, where the next act of this strange drama awaited. Chapter 3. The Patron's Mask. The fog hung low over London, cloaking the city in a damp, ghostly shroud as Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson stepped out of their hansom cab. The cobblestones glistened under the gaslights, and the air carried the faint tang of coal smoke and river mud. Their destination loomed ahead, the grand, ivy-draped manor of Lord Reginald Ashburn, a name that had surfaced in the cryptic ledger found in Maestro Enrico Veluti's workshop. The ledger, with its coded entries, had pointed to Ashburn as a key figure in Veluti's secret dealings, a patron whose wealth and eccentricity might hold answers to the puppeteer's mysterious disappearance. Holmes, his sharp eyes scanning the manor's Gothic silhouette, adjusted his scarf against the chill. Watson, a man like Ashburn does not fund an artist like Veluti out of mere philanthropy. There is purpose here, dark, I suspect, and deeply hidden. Watson, clutching his medical bag as a ward against the night's unease, nodded. You think he's involved in Veluti's vanishing? The man's a recluse, Holmes. Hardly the sort to dirty his hands with crime. Recluses, Holmes replied, his voice low, are often the most dangerous, for their obsessions fester in solitude. Come, we must tread carefully. The manor's iron gates creaked as a liveried servant ushered them through a courtyard lined with grotesque stone gargoyles, their eyes seeming to follow the pair. The servant, a gaunt man with a nervous tic, led them into a cavernous hall adorned with tapestries depicting mythological scenes, satyrs, nymphs, and mechanical marvels woven in gold and crimson thread. A faint hum, like the ticking of a distant clock, pulsed through the air, setting Watson's nerves on edge. Lord Ashburn awaited them in a drawing-room lit by a roaring fire. He was a tall, angular man in his late 50s, with a mane of silver hair and eyes that gleamed with an unsettling intensity. His velvet smoking jacket bore intricate embroidery, and his fingers, long and pale, toyed with a gold pocket watch. Behind him, a glass cabinet displayed an array of mechanical curiosities, clockwork birds, spinning automatons, and a tiny brass dancer frozen mid-pirouette. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," Ashburn said, his voice smooth as polished marble. "To what do I owe this unexpected visit? I am not accustomed to receiving guests unannounced." Holmes offered a thin smile, his gaze sweeping the room, cataloging every detail: the faint scuff on the hearthrug, the smudge of ink on Ashbourne's cuff, the faint scent of oil and wood polish. "We are here regarding Maestro Enrico Velluti, your associate. He has vanished, and we have reason to believe you may know something of his fate." Ashburn's expression remained impassive, though his fingers tightened around the watch. "Velluti? A talented man, to be sure, but I am merely a patron of his art. I collect rare automata. You see, his puppets are exquisite. Beyond that, I know little of his personal affairs." "Curious, then," Holmes said, stepping closer to the cabinet, "that your name appears in his private ledger, alongside sums that suggest more than casual patronage. Payments for special commissions, perhaps?" Ashburn's eyes narrowed, but he recovered quickly, gesturing to a pair of armchairs. "Please sit. You misunderstand, Mr. Holmes. My contributions supported Velluti's work, nothing more. His disappearance is news to me, and I am as concerned as you." Watson, settling into a chair, noted the tension in Ashburn's posture, the way his gaze darted to a shadowed corner of the room. "Concerned enough to help us, my lord. Any detail, however small, could lead us to him." Ashburn sighed, rising to pour 3 glasses of port from a crystal decanter. "I last saw Velluti a month ago at a private showing of his latest creation, a marionette so lifelike it could pass for human in dim light. He was preoccupied, muttering about pressures from certain parties. I assumed it was the strain of his craft." Holmes accepted the glass but did not drink, his eyes fixed on Ashburn. "And these parties, did he name them?" "No names," Ashburn replied, too quickly. He was vague. "Artists, you know, prone to dramatics." Holmes set the glass down, his fingers brushing the table's edge, where he noticed a faint carving, a symbol resembling a veiled figure holding a string. "Yet you hosted a performance tonight, did you not? A puppet show, here in your manor. Might we see it?" Ashburn hesitated, then smiled. "Of course. A small indulgence of mine. Follow me." He led them through a maze of corridors, the walls lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors and more mechanical oddities. The hum Watson had noticed earlier grew louder, resolving into a rhythmic clatter as they approached a heavy oak door. Ashburn pushed it open, revealing a private theater, a circular room with tiered seats, a velvet curtain, and a stage bathed in the glow of gas lamps. The air was thick with the scent of wax and varnish. On the stage stood a dozen marionettes, their strings glinting like spiderwebs. Each was a masterpiece: delicate porcelain faces, silk costumes, and joints so fluid they seemed alive. But one figure, center stage, drew Holmes' attention. It was a male puppet, dressed in a frock coat, with dark hair and a strikingly familiar face. Watson stifled a gasp. It was Velluti, or a chilling replica, its glass eyes catching the light with an unnatural shimmer. "Remarkable craftsmanship," Holmes said, his tone neutral but his eyes sharp. This one bears a striking resemblance to the missing puppeteer, a tribute perhaps. Ashburn chuckled, but the sound was strained. A coincidence, Mr. Holmes. Velluti often modeled his creations on real people. This one was inspired by him, nothing more. Holmes stepped onto the stage, examining the puppet closely. He noted the precision of its joints, the faint seam along its jaw, and a peculiar mechanism hidden in its chest, a small, ticking device unlike any standard puppetry gear. Inspired, yet equipped with mechanisms beyond mere performance. Tell me, Lord Ashburn, have you heard of the Order of the Saffron Veil? The name hung in the air like a thunderclap. Ashburn's composure faltered, his hand jerking, spilling a drop of port onto his cuff. The what? I'm afraid I don't follow. Holmes' gaze was unrelenting. A society rumored to dabble in forbidden arts, mechanical and otherwise. Velluti's ledger mentioned them alongside your name. Care to explain? Ashburn's face hardened. You overstep, Mr. Holmes. I am a collector, not a conspirator. If Velluti tangled with such people, it was his folly, not mine. Before Holmes could press further, a bell rang, signaling the start of the puppet show. Ashburn, seizing the distraction, gestured to the seats. Please enjoy the performance. Perhaps it will ease your suspicions. The curtains parted, and the show began. The marionettes moved with eerie grace, their strings manipulated by unseen hands above the stage. The story was a Gothic tale of a clockmaker who built a mechanical bride, only for her to turn on him. The Velluti puppet played the clockmaker, its movements so lifelike that Watson felt a chill. Holmes, however, watched not the stage but the shadows above, where the puppeteers worked. He noted a figure moving with unusual haste, slipping behind. A screen dot as the performance reached its climax. The mechanical bride, another disturbingly realistic puppet, raised a dagger. The audience, a handful of Ashburn's guests, gasped as the blade plunged toward the Velluti puppet. But Holmes was already moving, leaping onto the stage and seizing the puppet's arm. The dagger, he revealed, was real, its edge glinting. Wickedly curious, Holmes said, holding the blade aloft, that a prop should be so deadly. Someone intended harm tonight, not to a puppet, but to an idea. Ashburn rose, his face pale. This is outrageous. A mistake, surely. No. Mistake, Holmes interrupted, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the guests. Someone in this room sought to send a message. Watson checked the puppeteer's loft. Watson, revolver in hand, climbed a narrow staircase to the loft above the stage. He found it empty, save for a discarded cloak bearing the same veiled figure symbol Holmes had noticed earlier. Below, Holmes interrogated Ashburn, who protested his innocence, claiming the dagger was a stagehand's error. But Holmes' attention was elsewhere on a guest slipping out a side door, his face obscured by a scarf. Holmes gave chase, Watson close behind, through the manor's winding halls. The figure darted into the courtyard, where a carriage awaited. As it sped off, a wheel struck a loose cobblestone, wobbling dangerously. Holmes, with a burst of speed, grabbed the reins, forcing the carriage to a halt. But the passenger was gone, vanished into the fog. Returning to the manor, Holmes found a scrap of paper in the carriage, a ticket to a dockside warehouse, dated for the next night. The Order of the Saffron Veil, he murmured, is closer than I thought. As they left the manor, Watson glanced back at the glowing windows. Holmes, That puppet, it was too perfect. Do you think Veluti's still alive? Holmes' eyes gleamed in the gaslight. Alive or not, Watson, someone wants us to believe he's gone, and they're watching us. We must move quickly. The cab rattled back toward Baker Street, the fog swallowing the manor behind them. Holmes sat in silence, his mind racing through the clues, the ledger, the puppet, the order, the ticket. The game was afoot, and the stakes, he knew, were higher than a single man's life. The next morning, Holmes spread the ledger across the table at 221B, his fingers tracing the coded entries. Veluti was no mere puppeteer, he said, lighting his pipe. He was working on something extraordinary, something that frightened even him. Watson, nursing a cup of tea, frowned. Those puppets, they weren't just wood and string. That machine in the Veluti puppet's chest, what was it? A question for another day, Holmes replied, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. First, we must attend this warehouse rendezvous. The Order of the Saffron Veil is no myth, Watson. They're real, and they're dangerous. As night fell, Holmes and Watson prepared for the journey to the docks. Holmes donned a rough coat and cap, blending into the underbelly of London, while Watson checked his revolver. The ticket pointed to a derelict warehouse near the Thames, a place known for smugglers and secrets. The fog had thickened, muffling the city's sounds as they approached the river, the stench of fish and tar heavy in the air. The warehouse loomed, its windows dark, its walls streaked with grime. Holmes signaled for silence, his eyes scanning for watchers. A faint light flickered inside, and the sound of chanting drifted through a cracked door. Holmes eased it open, revealing a cavernous space lit by candles. Robed figures stood in a circle, their faces hidden behind saffron-colored veils. At the center was a stage, and on it, another puppet, this one a woman. Her movements jerky yet disturbingly human. Holmes whispered to Watson, "The Order's work. They're not just collectors, they're experimenters." Before they could move closer, a hand clamped over Watson's mouth, and a blade pressed against his throat. Holmes spun, his own knife flashing, but the attacker was swift, melting back into the shadows. The chanting stopped, and the robed figures turned, their veils glinting in the candlelight. "Mr. Holmes," a voice hissed from the darkness, "you were not invited." Holmes, undeterred, stepped forward. "Yet here I am. Where is Veluti?" Laughter echoed, cold and hollow. "The puppeteer? He serves a greater purpose now. Leave or join him." A trapdoor opened beneath them, and Holmes grabbed Watson, pulling him back as the floor gave way. They landed hard in a lower chamber, the air thick with dust. Above, the chanting resumed and footsteps faded. Holmes lit a match, revealing a room filled with crates, each labeled with the veiled figure's symbol. "Watson," Holmes said, his voice grim, "we've stumbled into their lair. Veluti's disappearance is but a thread in a larger web. They climbed out, finding the warehouse empty, the order gone." But Holmes pocketed a torn map from one of the crates, its edges marked with cryptic symbols. As they emerged into the fog, a carriage rumbled past, its driver cloaked in saffron. Holmes' eyes narrowed. "We're being hunted," he said. "But they've underestimated us. Tomorrow, Watson, we unravel the Order of the Saffron Veil." The chapter ends with Holmes and Watson retreating to Baker Street, the map spread before them, its secrets waiting to be decoded. The puppeteer's fate and the Order's true purpose remained shrouded, but Holmes' resolve was unshaken. The game was far from over. Chapter 4. The Saffron Veil. The London night was a tapestry of fog and flickering gaslights, its streets alive with the restless hum of a city that never truly slept. Sherlock Holmes, clad in a borrowed overcoat and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his piercing eyes, moved through the shadows of Whitechapel with the grace of a phantom. His disguise as a wealthy collector of curiosities was meticulous: a gold-tipped cane, a velvet waistcoat, and a faint air of arrogance that he wore as convincingly as any actor. Dr. John Watson trailed a step behind, his own attire less ostentatious, but equally unfamiliar, a plain merchant's coat, his face half hidden by a scarf. The two men were bound for a clandestine meeting of the Order of the Saffron Veil, a secret society whose name had surfaced in Lord Ashbourne's cryptic slip, and whose shadow now loomed over the mystery of Enrico Velluti's disappearance. The trail had begun in the opulent halls of Ashbourne's Manor, where Holmes had noted the aristocrat's unease, the subtle tremor in his voice when he mentioned the order, the ledger from Velluti's workshop, its pages filled with coded transactions, had confirmed Ashbourne as a patron, but not the mastermind. The true orchestrator lay hidden within this enigmatic cult, and Holmes was determined to unmask them. The stolen map, snatched from Ashbourne's study during their harrowing escape, had led them here, a nondescript alley where a weathered door, marked only by a faint saffron-colored sigil, promised entry to the unknown. Holmes paused before the door, his gloved hand tracing the sigil-less stylized veil entwined with a marionette's strings. "A symbol of control," he murmured, his voice low but sharp. "The order fancies itself the puppeteer of fate. We shall see how they fare when their own strings are tugged." Watson shifted uneasily, his hand resting on the revolver concealed beneath his coat. "Holmes, this feels like walking into a lion's den with nothing but a stick. We don't even know what this order is: fanatics, criminals, or something worse." "Worse, I suspect," Holmes replied, his lips curling into a faint smile. "But knowledge is our weapon, Watson, and I intend to wield it." He rapped on the door in a precise rhythm, 3 short, 2 long. A code gleamed from the ledger's margins. The door creaked open, revealing a cloaked figure whose face was obscured by a saffron veil. Without a word, the figure gestured for them to enter. The passage beyond was narrow, its walls damp and lined with flickering torches. The air carried a strange mix of incense and machine oil, a scent that grew stronger as they descended a spiral staircase into the bowels of the building. Watson's grip on his revolver tightened. Every shadow seemed to pulse with unseen eyes. Holmes, however, moved with the calm assurance of a man who had already mapped the battlefield in his mind, dot at the bottom of the stairs. They emerged into a vast subterranean chamber, its vaulted ceiling lost in darkness. The room was a bizarre fusion of cathedral and workshop. Stone arches loomed over tables cluttered with gears, springs, and half-assembled puppets, their wooden faces frozen in unsettling expressions. At the chamber's center stood a circular stage, bathed in the golden glow of saffron-hued lanterns. Around it, a dozen figures in veiled robes sat in silence, their attention fixed on a raised platform where a single puppet, a disturbingly lifelike figure in a velvet cloak, danced. Without visible strings, Holmes and Watson slipped into the back row, blending seamlessly with the other attendees. The air thrummed with anticipation. And Watson's unease grew as he noticed the puppets scattered throughout the room, their glass eyes seeming to follow him. "Holmes," he whispered, "this place is unnatural. Those puppets, there, watching us." "An illusion, Watson," Holmes replied, though his eyes were fixed on the stage. "Or perhaps not. Observe the mechanism beneath the platform. It's no ordinary puppet show." The performance began with a low hum, like the drone of a distant engine. The puppet on stage moved with uncanny fluidity, its gestures mimicking a living person so perfectly that Watson felt a chill. Its lips parted, and a voice rich, melodic, and eerily familiar filled the chamber. "Welcome, seekers of the veil," it intoned. "Tonight we glimpse the future, a world where art transcends flesh, where the strings of destiny are ours to command." Watson leaned closer to Holmes. "That voice, it's Veluty's, or a damn good imitation." Holmes nodded, his gaze dissecting the scene. "The puppet is a marvel, but its purpose is darker. Note the audience, Watson. They're not here for entertainment. They're investors, conspirators, or both." As the puppet continued its speech, extolling the virtues of a new era where machines could house the human soul, Holmes scanned the room. His eyes settled on a figure at the edge of the stage, cloaked in black with a saffron veil that shimmered faintly in the lantern light. The figure's movements were subtle but commanding, a conductor orchestrating the unseen. Holmes whispered, "That's our leader. Mark them well." The puppet's speech grew fervent, describing a final performance set for midnight in 3 days' time, a spectacle that would reshape the world. The audience murmured in approval, and Holmes' expression hardened. "A machine to capture human essence," he muttered. "Veluty's work twisted to their ends. We must learn more." When the performance ended, the veiled figures rose, dispersing into side chambers for what Holmes deduced were private negotiations. He signaled Watson to follow, and they trailed a group into a smaller room lined with shelves of mechanical parts and ancient tomes. Here, the air was thick with the scent of saffron and something sharper chloroform, Holmes noted, his senses attuned to every detail. A robed figure, unaware of their presence, spoke in hushed tones to another. "The puppeteer resisted, but the machine is nearly complete. Morvith assures us it will be ready for the gala." "Morvith," Holmes whispered, committing the name to memory. "The architect of this madness." Before they could overhear more, a puppet on the shelf twitched, its head snapping toward them. Watson stifled a gasp as its eyes glowed faintly, a mechanical click echoing in the silence. Holmes reacted instantly, pulling Watson behind a crate as footsteps approached. The robed figure paused, then moved on, but the puppet's gaze lingered, as if guided by an unseen intelligence. "We've been noticed," Holmes said, his voice calm but urgent. "We must move quickly." They slipped back into the main chamber, where the crowd was thinning. Holmes' eyes darted to a table covered with blueprints and strange devices, one of which resembled a miniature stage rigged with wires and glass tubes. He pocketed a small sketch, its lines suggesting a complex mechanism unlike anything he'd seen. "This is Veluty's work," he said, "or a perversion of it." As they made for the exit, a shout rang out. "Intruders!" The veiled leader pointed from the stage, and the remaining figures turned, their movements eerily synchronized. Holmes grabbed Watson's arm, pulling him toward a side passage. "Run, Watson!" The chase was a blur of torchlit corridors and clattering footsteps. Puppets along the walls sprang to life, their wooden limbs jerking as if animated by malice. Watson fired a warning shot, splintering a puppet's arm, but more emerged from the shadows, their strings glinting like spiderwebs. Holmes, ever the strategist, noted the pattern of their movements. "They're controlled remotely," he shouted. "Find the source." In a narrow hallway, Holmes spotted a concealed panel. With a swift kick, he shattered it, revealing a tangle of wires and a small control box. He yanked the wires free, and the puppets collapsed, lifeless. But the respite was brief. Guards in saffron robes appeared, armed with curved blades. Holmes, using his cane as a weapon, disarmed one with a deft strike, while Watson grappled with another, his military training proving its worth. They burst through a rusted door into the alley, the fog swallowing them as they ran. Behind, the sound of pursuit faded, but Holmes' cloak caught on a jagged pipe, tearing free as they escaped. "A small price to pay," he panted, clutching the stolen sketch. "We have what we need." Back at 221B Baker Street, Holmes spread the sketch on the table, its lines revealing a map to an abandoned warehouse in Limehouse. "The order's lair," he said, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of the hunt. "Veluti is there, I'm certain. And this machine, they mean to use it at their final performance." Watson, nursing a bruised knuckle, frowned. "What is this machine, Holmes? It sounds like madness capturing a man's soul in a puppet." "Not madness, Watson, but ambition," Holmes replied. "Veluti's genius was in creating lifelike marionettes. The order seeks to go further, to trap consciousness itself. If they succeed, the implications are catastrophic." He lit his pipe, the smoke curling like the strings of a puppet. "We have 3 days until their gala. We must find Veluti and stop this abomination. The warehouse is our next move." Watson nodded, his resolve hardening. "Then we go to Limehouse. But Holmes, how do you infiltrate a place like that? They'll be expecting us now." Holmes smiled, a glint of mischief in his eyes. "They expect Sherlock Holmes, the detective. They will not expect a man of their own ilk, a collector, perhaps, or a rogue inventor. We shall give them a performance they'll never forget." The night deepened, and the fog outside grew thicker, as if the city itself were conspiring to hide the secrets of the Saffron Veil. Holmes sat by the fire, his mind a whirl of deductions, while Watson cleaned his revolver, preparing for the battle ahead. The game was afoot, and the stakes were nothing less than the soul of a genius and perhaps the future itself. The warehouse in Limehouse was a hulking relic of London's industrial past, its brick facade crumbling under the weight of neglect. By the time Holmes and Watson arrived, the moon was high, casting a sickly light over the docks. The map had led them to a side entrance, hidden behind rusted crates and tangled ivy. Holmes, now dressed as a dock worker to avoid suspicion, picked the lock with practiced ease, while Watson kept watch, his eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of the order's guards. Inside, the warehouse was a labyrinth of crates and machinery, its air thick with the scent of oil and decay. A faint hum, like the pulse of a sleeping giant, echoed through the vast space. Holmes moved with purpose, his lantern casting long shadows that danced like marionettes. "This place is a stage," he whispered. "Every detail is deliberate. Stay sharp, Watson." They navigated through piles of discarded puppet parts, wooden limbs, glass eyes, and tangled strings that seemed to writhe in the dim light. At the center of the warehouse, they found it, a hidden stage, smaller than the one in Whitechapel, but no less elaborate. Its curtains were saffron, its floor inlaid with the same sigil they'd seen on the door. Above the stage, a cage hung, and within it a raven croaked, its voice a chilling mimicry of Velludi's. The strings are cut, it rasped, its beady eyes fixed on Holmes. Watson shuddered. That bird, it's like it knows us. A recording, perhaps, Holmes said, examining the cage, or something more sinister. Velludi's work was never just art. He traced a wire from the cage to a panel beneath the stage, where a complex array of gears and tubes hummed softly. This is the heart of their operation. A prototype, I wager, for their soul capturing machine. As Holmes studied the mechanism, Watson noticed a blueprint pinned to a nearby crate. It depicted a device with a chair, electrodes, and a glass chamber, eerily similar to the sketch Holmes had stolen. "Holmes, look at this. It's like a torture device." "Worse," Holmes said, his voice grim. "It's a prison. If Velludi perfected this, it could transfer a mind or part of it into a mechanical form. The Order wants control, not just of puppets, but of men." Before they could investigate further, a trap sprang. A hiss filled the air, and green gas began to pour from vents in the floor. Watson coughed, his vision blurring, but Holmes was already moving. He smashed a nearby crate, revealing a ventilation shaft. "Climb, Watson," he shouted, shoving his friend toward the opening. They scrambled through the shaft, the gas stinging their lungs, and emerged onto the warehouse roof. The night air was a relief, but the danger was far from over. Below, figures in saffron robes gathered, their lanterns casting an eerie glow. Holmes and Watson crouched behind a chimney, watching as the Order's guards searched the warehouse. "We can't fight them all," Watson whispered. "What now?" Holmes held up the blueprint, his eyes alight with determination. "We have what we came for. This blueprint confirms Velludi's role and his danger. He's alive, Watson, but not for long if we don't act." They slipped away under cover of fog, the blueprint tucked safely in Holmes' coat. Back at 221B, Holmes spread it out, his fingers tracing the intricate lines. "This machine is incomplete," he said. "Velludi is the key. They need him to finish it, which means he's still in their grasp." Watson poured a brandy, his hands still shaking from the gas. "Where do we look next? The Order could have him anywhere." Holmes' eyes narrowed. The imposter at the Dockside Tavern. That was no coincidence. The Order is covering their tracks, which means Velludi is close likely somewhere they can control him without drawing attention. A coastal manor, perhaps, isolated but accessible. He pulled a map of England's southern coast from his shelf, his finger landing on a cluster of estates near Dover. Here, the Order's resources suggest wealth, and a manor would suit. Their need for secrecy. We leave at dawn. As the fire crackled, Holmes leaned back, his mind racing. The Order of the Saffron Mail was no mere cult. It was a syndicate with ambitions that threatened the very nature of humanity. Velludi, the genius puppeteer, was their pawn, and Holmes was determined to cut the strings that bound him. The game was far from over, but the next move was clear: to the coast, to the heart of the Order's lair, where the truth and perhaps Velludi himself awaited. Chapter 5. The Warehouse of Whispers. The fog clung to the London streets like a conspirator, muffling the clatter of hooves and the distant cries of night vendors as Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson made their way toward the east end. The stolen map, its edges frayed and stained with ink, lay folded in Holmes' pocket, a fragile guide to an abandoned warehouse near the docks. The air grew colder, sharper, as they approached the river, the Thames' sluggish current whispering secrets beneath the mist. Holmes' eyes, keen as a hawk's, scanned the shadowed alleys, every muscle taut with anticipation. Watson, clutching his revolver, felt the weight of the unknown pressing against his chest. His breath visible in the damp air. The warehouse loomed ahead, a hulking silhouette against the gaslit haze. Its windows boarded and its iron gates rusted but formidable. The map had marked this place with a single cryptic symbol, a coiled serpent swallowing its tail. Holmes paused at the gate, his gloved fingers tracing the lock's mechanism. "A crude but effective barrier," he murmured, producing a set of picks from his coat. With a few deft movements, the lock yielded, and the gate creaked open, revealing a courtyard strewn with broken crates and tangles of rope. Watson glanced at Holmes, his voice low. "This place feels like a tomb. Are you certain Veluti is here?" Holmes' lips twitched into a faint smile. "Certainty is a luxury, Watson. But the map, the Order's whispers, and Veluti's own fears all converge here. We proceed with caution." He stepped forward, his boots silent on the damp cobblestones, and Watson followed, the revolver a cold comfort in his hand. The warehouse door was ajar, a sliver of darkness beckoning. Holmes pushed it open, and the hinges groaned, a sound that seemed to echo into the cavernous interior. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of mildew and something sharper burnt cedar, the same acrid note from Veluti's workshop. The vast space was a labyrinth of crates and tarpaulin-covered shapes, their outlines vague in the dim light filtering through cracks in the boarded windows. High above, the rafters groaned under the weight of time, and somewhere a faint drip of water kept a mournful rhythm. Holmes moved with purpose, his lantern casting long shadows that danced across the walls. He stopped at a pile of discarded puppet parts, limbs of wood and porcelain, their joints rusted, their painted faces frozen in expressions of joy or despair. "Veluti's handiwork," he said, kneeling to inspect a marionette with a cracked cheek. "These are not mere toys. They're prototypes, experiments in motion and design. Look here." He pointed to a series of fine wires embedded in the puppet's arm, so delicate they were nearly invisible. "These are not for show. They suggest a mechanism far beyond simple puppetry." Watson frowned, peering at the wires. "What kind of mechanism?" Holmes' eyes gleamed. "One that mimics life itself. Veluti was no ordinary puppeteer, Watson. He was an engineer of the impossible, and someone likely the Order wanted his genius for their own ends." They pressed deeper into the warehouse, navigating narrow paths between towering stacks of crates. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional scuttle of rats or the creak of settling wood. Holmes' lantern caught a glint of metal, brass lever protruding from the floor, half hidden by a tattered curtain. He crouched, brushing away dust to reveal a trapdoor, its edges seamless with the floorboards. "Here," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The stage is set." With Watson's help, Holmes pried open the trapdoor, revealing a stone staircase descending into darkness. The air that rose from below was colder, laced with the metallic tang of machinery. Holmes descended first, his lantern illuminating walls. etched with strange symbols, circles within circles, lines converging like the spokes of a wheel. Watson followed, his heart pounding, the revolver now drawn and held at the ready dot at the bottom of the stairs. They found a hidden chamber, its walls lined with shelves of tools and half-assembled devices. In the center stood a stage, smaller than the one at the Grand Lyceum, but no less elaborate, its curtains drawn back to reveal a backdrop painted with a starry sky. On the stage sat a single puppet, its face a haunting replica of Veluti's, its eyes glinting as if alive. Watson stifled a gasp. "Good God, Holmes, it's him." "Not quite," Holmes said, approaching the stage. He ran his fingers along the puppet's strings, which led upward to a complex rigging of pulleys and gears suspended from the ceiling. A masterpiece of deception, but still a puppet. Yet, he leaned closer, his eyes narrowing. "There's something more here. Listen." A faint sound came from the shadows, a rhythmic tapping, like a metronome. Holmes followed it to a corner of the chamber, where a large iron cage stood, draped in cloth. He pulled the cloth aside, revealing a raven, its feathers glossy black, its beak snapping at the bars. The bird tilted its head, and in a voice that sent a chill down Watson's spine, it spoke. "The strings are cut." "The strings are cut." Veluti's voice, Watson whispered, his grip tightening on the revolver. "How is this possible?" Holmes studied the raven, his expression unreadable. A phonographic device, perhaps, embedded in the cage. Veluti recorded his voice, or someone did it for him. "This bird is a messenger, Watson, left here to taunt or to warn." He turned back to the stage, his gaze sweeping the room. "We're close. Too close for comfort." As if in response, a low hum filled the chamber, and the stage began to move. The pulleys above creaked, and the Veluti puppet jerked to life, its limbs twitching in a grotesque parody of motion. Watson stepped back, his revolver raised, but Holmes held up a hand. "Wait. It's automated. Watch the mechanism." The puppet's head turned, its glass eyes fixing on them, and from somewhere within it came a faint whirring, like a clockwork heart. Then, without warning, the floor beneath them shuddered. A hiss filled the air, and a noxious green vapor began to seep from vents hidden in the walls. Watson coughed, his eyes watering. "Holmes, it's a trap!" Holmes' mind raced, his gaze darting to the stage, the pulleys, the vents. "The mechanism is tied to the gas," he said, his voice calm but urgent. "Find the control." He lunged for the stage, tearing at the rigging, while Watson stumbled toward the walls, searching for a lever or switch. The gas thickened, burning their throats, and Watson's vision began to blur. He tripped over a crate, his hand brushing against a cold metal panel. With a desperate tug, he pulled it open, revealing a tangle of wires and a single red lever. "Holmes!" he shouted, his voice hoarse. "Here!" Holmes was at his side in an instant, yanking the lever down. The hissing stopped, and the vents slammed shut, but the gas still hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Holmes grabbed Watson's arm, pulling him toward the staircase. Up, now. They staggered up the steps, the raven's eerie chant echoing. Behind them, "The strings are cut, the strings are cut." At the top, they collapsed into the warehouse proper, gasping for air. Watson's head swam, but Holmes was already on his feet, his lantern scanning the floor. "We're not done," he said, his voice grim. "The trap was meant to kill, but it also protected something. Look." He pointed to a crate near the trapdoor. its lid slightly askew. Inside, nestled among straw, was a rolled parchment blueprint, its lines intricate and precise, depicting a machine unlike anything Watson had ever seen. It was a lattice of gears and tubes, with annotations in Veluti's spidery hand. Consciousness transfer. Prototype Alpha. Holmes unrolled the blueprint, his eyes scanning it with ferocious intensity. "This is what the Order wanted," he said. Veluti wasn't just building puppets. He was crafting vessels for the mind itself, a machine to trap a human soul in wood and wire. Madness, Watson, or genius? Perhaps both. Watson stared at the blueprint, his mind reeling. "You mean they wanted to put Veluti's mind into that puppet?" "Or someone else's," Holmes said, folding the blueprint and tucking it into his coat. The Order's obsession with control suggests a purpose beyond mere spectacle. A puppet that thinks, that acts, that deceives. It could be a weapon, a spy, or worse. But Veluti is alive, Watson. The raven, the trap, the blueprint, there. All signs he's being forced to perfect this abomination. They left the warehouse, the fog swallowing their footsteps as they emerged into the night. Holmes' face was set, his mind already turning to the next move. "We must find Veluti before the Order's final performance," he said. "The blueprint is our leverage, but it's also a death sentence if we're caught with it." We head to the coast. The clues point to a manor by the sea. Watson nodded, his heart still pounding from the gas and the raven's haunting voice. "And if the Order is waiting for us?" Holmes' eyes gleamed in the lantern light. "Then we cut their strings, Watson, one by one." The journey back through the city was tense, the blueprint a heavy presence in Holmes' coat. The streets were alive with shadows, and more than once, Watson caught the glint of eyes watching from alleyways. The Order of the Saffron Veil was closing in, their reach as insidious as the fog itself. Holmes, however, was undeterred, his mind a steel trap, piecing together the puzzle of Veluti's fate. They boarded a hansom cab, the driver's face half hidden by a scarf, and as the wheels rattled over the cobblestones, Holmes leaned close. To Watson, the warehouse was a test, he said. The Order wanted to see how far we'd go, how much we'd uncover. They underestimated us, but they won't make that mistake again. We must be ready for anything. Watson gripped his revolver, the weight of it grounding him. "What's our next move?" Holmes' gaze was distant, fixed on the horizon where the river met the sea. "We follow the blueprint to its source. Veluti is alive, and he's close. The manor by the sea holds the answers and the danger. We'll need our wits, Watson, and perhaps a touch of luck." The cab rolled on, carrying them toward the coast, toward a confrontation that would test their courage and unravel the mystery of the Vanishing Puppeteer. The warehouse of whispers had yielded its secrets, but the stage was far from empty, and the final act was yet to come. Chapter 6. The Puppeteer's Double. The fog heavy over London's docks, a shroud of mist that clung to the cobblestones and muffled the distant cries of gulls. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson moved swiftly through the labyrinthine alleys, their footsteps echoing in the damp night air. A report had reached them through one of Holmes' network of informants, a ragged boy known as Wiggins, that a man resembling Maestro Enrico Veluti had been spotted at the Black Anchor, a seedy tavern nestled among the warehouses of Wapping. The tip was tantalizing, but Holmes' sharp mind was already threading together the inconsistencies of the case. Veluti vanished mid-performance, feared for his life. Entangled with a shadowy cult, could he truly be drinking cheap ale in a dockside den? The answer, Holmes suspected, was far more sinister. The black anchor loomed ahead, its weathered sign creaking in the wind. The tavern's windows glowed with a sickly yellow light, casting distorted shadows of carousing sailors and dock workers onto the fog-draped street. Holmes paused, his keen eyes scanning the scene. "Watson," he murmured, adjusting his cap to obscure his features. "Observe the clientele. Rough men, but not without purpose. Note the two at the door to alert for mere drunkards. There, guarding something." Watson, his hand resting lightly on the revolver in his coat pocket, nodded. "You think Veluti's inside?" "Or someone who wishes us to believe he is," Holmes replied, his voice low. "The Order of the Saffron Veil has resources. A double would serve their purpose to mislead us to buy time. We must tread carefully." They approached the tavern, blending into the crowd of laborers spilling out into the night. The air inside was thick with the stench of stale beer, tobacco, and unwashed bodies. The din of raucous laughter and clinking glasses filled the room, but Holmes' gaze cut through the chaos like a blade. At a corner table, half hidden by a tattered curtain, sat a man whose silhouette bore an uncanny resemblance to Veluti. The same sharp jaw, the same shock of dark hair streaked with silver. Though his posture was slouched, his hands clutching a tankard with a tremor that suggested either fear or intoxication. Holmes signaled Watson to take a seat near the bar, where he could keep watch, while Holmes himself wove through the crowd, his movements fluid and unremarkable. He settled at a table near the man, ordering a pint to maintain his cover. The man glanced up, his eyes darting nervously, and Holmes caught a glimpse of something that confirmed his suspicions. The man's hands, though calloused, lacked the fine scars and sinewy strength of a puppeteer's, accustomed to years of manipulating delicate strings. The detective leaned back, feigning disinterest, but his mind was racing. The man was a fraud, a carefully chosen look-alike. The question was why. Was he a decoy to lure Holmes into a trap, or a pawn unaware of the game he was playing? Holmes decided to test the waters. He rose, approached the bar, and deliberately bumped into a burly sailor, spilling the man's drink. "Oi, watch it." The sailor growled, his fist clenching. "My apologies," Holmes said smoothly, his voice adopting the rough cadence of a dock worker. "Let me buy you another." As he spoke, he slipped a coin onto the bar, ensuring it caught the light. The sailor grunted, mollified, but the commotion had drawn the attention of the Veluti look-alike, who stiffened and glanced toward the door. Holmes returned to his table, watching as the man stood abruptly, pulling his coat tight and hurrying toward the exit. Watson caught Holmes' eye, and the two moved in unison, slipping out after him. The fog had thickened, swallowing the street in a gray haze. The man's footsteps clattered ahead, quick and uneven, leading them deeper into the warren of alleys. "He's panicked," Watson whispered, his breath visible in the chill air. "He knows he's being followed." "Precisely," Holmes sighed, his eyes glinting. "And panic reveals truth. Stay close, but not too close." The chase led them through a maze of crates and barrels, the air heavy with the tang of salt and tar. The man darted into a narrow passage, and Holmes quickened his pace, his long legs eating up the distance. As they rounded a corner, the man stumbled, and Holmes seized the opportunity, closing the gap in an instant. He grabbed the man's arm, spinning him around. "Who are you?" Holmes demanded, his voice low but commanding. The man's face, now fully visible in the dim light of a gas lamp, was indeed a near-perfect match for Veluti's, but the eyes wide with terror betrayed him. They lacked the puppeteer's fiery intensity. I don't know what you mean," the man stammered, his accent thick with the East End. "I'm just a bloke having a drink." Holmes tightened his grip. "You are no more Enrico Velluti than I am the Queen. Who hired you? Speak, or I'll have you in a cell by dawn." The man's resolve crumbled. "Please, sir, I didn't mean no harm. They paid me good money. To sit there, look like him, talk like him. Said it was a prank, nothing more. Who paid you?" Holmes pressed, his tone unrelenting. "I don't know their names," the man whimpered. "Two men, posh-like, but hard. They gave me a purse and a picture of the Italian, told me to study his face, his ways. Said to be at the Black Anchor. Tonight, that's all." Watson stepped forward, his face stern. "And you didn't think to ask why?" The man shook his head. "I needed the coin, sir. Times is hard." Holmes released him, but kept his gaze locked on the man's face. "Where are they holding the real Velluti?" The man's eyes widened further. "I swear, I don't know. They mentioned a manor. Out by the coast somewhere near Dover. Said the Italian was working on something big. But they'd kill me if I said more." Holmes exchanged a glance with Watson. Dover. The coastal manor fit with the order's penchant for secrecy, far from London's prying eyes. But the mention of Velluti working suggested he was alive, perhaps coerced into completing his forbiddance machine. The detective's mind raced, piecing together the puzzle. The order needed Velluti's genius, but they also needed to control the narrative of his disappearance. This look-alike was a distraction, meant to mislead anyone searching for the puppeteer. Before Holmes could press further, a sharp crack split the air, a gunshot. Watson shoved Holmes to the ground as a bullet whizzed past, embedding itself in a nearby crate. The look-alike screamed and bolted, vanishing into the fog. From the shadows emerged three figures, their faces obscured by scarves, their hands gripping pistols and knives. Hired thugs, no doubt sent by the order to silence the decoy and anyone who got too close. "Watson, to your left!" Holmes shouted, rolling to his feet and drawing his own revolver. Watson fired, his shot grazing one thug's shoulder, sending him staggering back. The second lunged at Holmes with a knife, but the detective sidestepped, using the man's momentum to hurl him into a stack of barrels. The third thug aimed his pistol, but Holmes was faster, disarming him with a precise strike to the wrist. The alley erupted into chaos, the fog swirling around them as blows were exchanged. Watson, ever the soldier, held his ground, fending off the wounded thug with a series of well-placed punches. Holmes, meanwhile, used the environment to his advantage, toppling crates to block their attackers' paths. But the thugs were relentless, and more shadows loomed in the distance. Reinforcements. "We can't hold them all." Watson panted, ducking a wild swing. Holmes' eyes darted to a pile of discarded fishing nets nearby. "Watson, cover me," he called, diving for the nets. With a deft movement, he flung them over the nearest thug, entangling the man's arms and legs. Watson fired another shot into the air, scattering the approaching figures, and the two made a break for it, sprinting back toward the main street. They ducked into a darkened warehouse, the sounds of pursuit fading behind them. Watson leaned against a wall, catching his breath. That was too close, Holmes. If they're willing to kill their own decoy, they're desperate. Desperation is their weakness, Holmes replied, his mind already elsewhere. The manor near Dover is our next move. Veluti is there, and so is the heart of this conspiracy. But we must be cautious. The Order will expect us now. As they caught their breath, Holmes' thoughts turned to a plan. The black anchor had been a trap, but it had also been a revelation. The lookalikes' fear, the mention of Dover, the Order's willingness to kill all pointed to a larger scheme, one that hinged on Veluti's genius and the mysterious machine he was being forced to perfect. But how to reach him without walking into another ambush? Holmes' gaze fell on a crate marked with the emblem of a shipping company, its contents spilling out, ropes, pulleys, and a small wooden figure, a crude puppet. An idea sparked. "Watson," he said, a faint smile playing on his lips, "do you recall Veluti's performance? The way his puppets seemed almost alive?" "We shall use their own methods against them," Watson frowned. "You mean to use a puppet?" "Precisely, Holmes." Sod, picking up the wooden figure. "A decoy of our own. The Order expects us to charge toward Dover, reckless and direct. So we shall give them what they expect, or so they'll believe." Over the next hour, Holmes worked with a speed and precision that left Watson in awe. Using the materials at hand, wood, string, and a spare coat, he crafted a rough mannequin, its silhouette vaguely resembling himself. With a few deft adjustments, he rigged it to a pulley system, allowing it to move in a lifelike manner. "This," Holmes said, "will be our shadow in the fog." They returned to the docks under cover of darkness, setting up their decoy near the entrance to the black anchor. Holmes positioned the puppet in an alley, its silhouette visible against a gas lamp, and used the pulleys to make it shift subtly, as if watching the tavern. Watson, stationed nearby, kept watch for the Order's men. Sure enough, within the hour, two figures approached, their movements cautious but purposeful. They spotted the puppet and hesitated, whispering to each other. Holmes, hidden in the shadows, pulled the strings, making the figure turn as if alerted. The men drew their weapons and advanced, only to find themselves ensnared in a trap of Holmes' design, a net rigged to collapse from above, triggered by a tripwire. With the thugs incapacitated, Holmes and Watson slipped away, their decoy having served its purpose. The Order would believe them still lurking in London, buying them precious time to reach Dover unmolested. They made their way to King's Cross Station, the first train to the coast leaving at dawn. As the train rattled through the countryside, Holmes sat in silence, his mind a whirl of deductions. The Order of the Saffron Veil was no mere cult of eccentrics. Their obsession with Veluti's technology suggested a purpose far grander and more dangerous than mere puppetry. The machine, the final performance, the coastal manor, all pointed to a scheme that could disrupt the very fabric of society. But what was the endgame? And why Veluti, of all men? Watson, sensing his friend's intensity, broke the silence. "Holmes, you're certain Veluti's alive?" "As certain as I can be," Holmes replied, his eyes fixed on the passing fields. "The Order needs him. His genius is the key to their machine, whatever it may be. But they underestimate him in U.S. We shall have him back, Watson, and we shall bring their house of strings crashing down." The train steamed onward, carrying them toward the cliffs of Dover and the heart of the mystery. The fog of London was behind them, but a darker shadow loomed ahead, one that would test Holmes' intellect and Watson's courage to their limits. Chapter 7. The Manor by the Sea. The train's rhythmic clatter echoed through the night as Holmes and Watson sped toward the rugged cliffs of the southern coast. The carriage was dimly lit, its windows streaked with rain, reflecting the stormy mood of their mission. Holmes sat motionless, his sharp eyes fixed on the blueprint of Veluti's consciousness-transferring machine, its intricate diagrams sprawling across the paper like a spider's web. Watson, nursing a bruised shoulder from their dockside skirmish, watched his friend with a mix of admiration and concern. "Holmes," Watson ventured, breaking the silence, "do you truly believe Veluti is still alive?" That impostor at the tavern seems certain, but the Order's ruthlessness suggests otherwise. Holmes didn't look up. The impostor's fear was genuine, Watson. A man does not tremble so convincingly unless he knows the stakes. Veluti lives, if only because the Order needs him to perfect their infernal device. The blueprint confirms it. See here. He pointed to a series of gears labeled neural conduit. This machine requires a living subject to function. Dead men don't dream, and this device thrives on the dreamer's mind. Watson frowned, peering at the cryptic annotations. "And this manor we're heading to, it's no ordinary hideout, is it?" "No," Holmes replied, folding the blueprint. "It's a fortress, likely rigged with traps to protect the Order's secrets. We must tread carefully, Watson. The puppeteer's life and perhaps more depends on it." The train screeched to a halt at a desolate coastal station, the platform, slick with rain and deserted save for a lone lamplight flickering in the wind. The air was thick with salt and the distant roar of waves crashing against cliffs. Holmes, cloaked in his greatcoat, led the way down a muddy path toward the manor, its silhouette looming against the stormy sky like a jagged scar. Watson clutched his revolver, his senses heightened by the eerie quiet. The manor stood atop a promontory, its Gothic spires clawing at the clouds. Its windows were dark, save for a faint glow emanating from a tower high above. The iron gates were ajar, creaking in the wind, as if inviting them into a trap. Holmes paused, his eyes scanning the grounds. "Notice the footprints, Watson," he whispered, pointing to faint impressions in the mud. "Heavy boots, recently made, circling the perimeter. Guards, likely armed." Watson nodded, gripping his weapon tighter. "How do we get in without raising the alarm?" Holmes' lips curved into a faint smile. "We don't. We make them come to us." He plucked a small stone from the ground and hurled it at a nearby lantern, shattering the glass. The sound echoed, and within moments, two burly figures emerged from the shadows, their faces obscured by scarves. Holmes and Watson pressed themselves against the gate's stone pillars, waiting. The guards approached, muttering curses, their lanterns casting erratic beams. Holmes struck first, his cane cracking against one guard's wrist, sending a pistol clattering to the ground. Watson tackled the second, a brief struggle ending with the man unconscious in the mud. Holmes bound their wrists with their own belts, dragging them into a nearby thicket. "Quickly now," he said, retrieving a key from one guard's pocket. "This should grant us entry." The manor's front door groaned as they pushed it open, revealing a cavernous hall lined with tapestries depicting grotesque puppet shows, their threads glinting in the dim light of a single chandelier. The air was heavy with the scent of oil and polished wood, and the faint clack of machinery echoed from somewhere deep within. Holmes' eyes darted to the floor, where faint scratches marked a path toward a spiral staircase. "This way," he murmured, his voice barely audible. The staircase descended into a labyrinth of corridors, each more oppressive than the last. The walls were lined with shelves holding lifeless puppets, their glass eyes staring blankly, their limbs dangling as if frozen mid-performance. Watson shivered, his breath visible in the cold air. "This place feels like a tomb, Holmes." "A tomb with a pulse," Holmes replied, pausing at a junction where 3 corridors diverged. He knelt, examining a faint smear of grease on the Kingsway. "Stone floor. Recent maintenance. The machine is close." He chose the leftmost path, his steps silent but purposeful. The corridor twisted and turned, its walls narrowing until they brushed the shoulders of the 2 men. Sconces flickered, casting shadows that seemed to writhe like marionettes. Suddenly, a click echoed, and Holmes froze, grabbing Watson's arm. "Trap," he hissed. A panel in the wall slid open, revealing a crossbow rigged to fire. Holmes. Dove, pulling Watson down as a bolt whizzed overhead, embedding itself in a puppet's wooden chest. The figure creaked, its head lolling as if mocking their narrow escape. "Booby traps," Watson muttered, heart pounding. "They're expecting." "Undes?" "Indeed," Holmes said, rising and inspecting the crossbow mechanism. "Cleverly designed, but predictable. The order relies on fear as much as engineering. Stay close, Watson, and watch the walls." They pressed on, navigating a gauntlet of traps pressure plates that triggered falling blades, tripwires linked to hidden darts, and a particularly fiendish floor panel that dropped into a pit lined with spikes. Holmes' keen senses and quick reflexes guided them through, though Watson's coat bore a fresh tear from a near miss. At last, they reached a heavy iron door, its surface etched with symbols resembling those in Veluti's ledger. Holmes traced the etchings, his fingers pausing on a spiral motif. "The Order's insignia," he said. "This is no mere door, it's a lock." He produced a small tool from his pocket, a slender pick he'd crafted for such occasions, and set to work. The lock clicked after a tense minute, and the door swung inward, revealing a vast chamber bathed in the glow of oil lamps. The room was a mechanical nightmare, its walls lined with gears and pistons that hummed with latent energy. At its center stood a grotesque contraption, a chair surrounded by coils of wire, glass tubes pulsing with an eerie green light, and a helmet studded with electrodes. Strapped to the chair was Maestro Enrico Velluti, his once vibrant face pale and haggard, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and defiance. Above him hung a marionette, an uncanny replica of the puppeteer himself, its strings connected to a complex pulley system that twitched as if alive. "Holmes," Watson whispered, drawing his revolver. "He's alive, but barely." Holmes' eyes narrowed, taking in every detail, the wires trailing from Velluti's temples, the blueprint's design brought to life, and the faint hum of electricity. "The machine is active," he said. "It's draining him, Watson. We must act quickly." Before they could move, a shadow detached from the chamber's far wall. A figure clad in a saffron cloak stepped forward, his face obscured by a porcelain mask carved to resemble a grinning puppet. "You're late, Mr. Holmes," the figure said, his voice smooth but laced with menace. "The maestro's work is nearly complete. Soon his essence will live forever in our creation." "Dr. Morveth, I presume," Holmes said, his tone icy. "Your order's obsession with immortality is as flawed as your traps." Release Veluti, or this ends badly for you." Morveth laughed, the sound echoing off the metal walls. "You underestimate the Order's vision. Veluti is but the first. With his mind in our puppet will control minds, nations, empires." He gestured, and the puppet above Veluti jerked, its wooden lips parting to emit a distorted version of the puppeteer's voice. "Help me." Watson's grip tightened on his revolver, but Holmes raised a hand. "Not yet, Watson. Morvath's arrogance is his weakness." He stepped forward, his eyes locked on the scientist. "Your machine is flawed. The blueprint shows instability in the neural conduits. Force it further, and it will collapse along with your dreams." Morvath's mask hid his expression, but his posture stiffened. "You know nothing of my work," he snarled, reaching for a lever on the machine. "Let's see how your logic fares against progress." Holmes lunged, tackling Morvath as the lever snapped downward. The machine roared, sparks flying as the green light intensified. Veluti cried out, his body convulsing in the chair. Watson rushed to the puppeteer's side, tearing at the straps while Holmes grappled with Morvath. The scientist was surprisingly strong, his movements precise, but Holmes was faster, pinning him against a gear-covered wall. "Watson, the helmet!" Holmes shouted, dodging a wild swing from Morvath. "Disconnect the electrodes." Watson fumbled with the wires, his hand shaking as Veluti's cries grew weaker. The puppet above thrashed, its strings snapping one by one, its wooden limbs flailing as if possessed. With a final yank, Watson freed the helmet, and the machine's hum faltered. The green light fading. Veluti slumped, unconscious but breathing. Morvath broke free, seizing a control box from the floor. "You've ruined nothing," he screamed, pressing a button. The puppet dropped, its strings severed, and landed with a clatter, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. It staggered toward Holmes, wooden limbs moving with eerie precision. Holmes sidestepped, grabbing a wrench from a nearby table and smashing the puppet's head, shattering its glass eyes. Morvath fled, disappearing through a hidden panel as alarms blared. Holmes didn't pursue, instead helping Watson lift Veluti. From the chair, the puppeteer's pulse was weak but steady. "He's alive," Watson said, relief flooding his voice. "But what was that thing?" "A prototype," Holmes said, examining the shattered puppet. "A crude attempt to house Veluti's mind. Morvath's ambition outstripped his skill, but he's not finished." He retrieved the control box Morvath had dropped, revealing a small screen displaying coordinates, the puppet replica. Morvath's taken it. They carried Veluti through the manor's labyrinth, evading more traps, a collapsing ceiling, a barrage of darts, and a floor that tilted toward a chasm. Holmes' quick thinking and Watson's steady aim saw them through, though not without cost. Watson's arm bled from a dart's graze, and Holmes' coat was singed by a burst of flame from a hidden nozzle. At last they emerged into the stormy night, the manor's tower glowing ominously behind them. Veluti stirred as they reached the cliffs, his voice a rasp. "Morvath. He plans to use the puppet at the gala, Buckingham Palace. He wants to control them all." Holmes' eyes gleamed with resolve. "Then we'll be there, Maestro. Your performance is over, but Morvath's encore awaits." He glanced at Watson, who nodded grimly, the rain plastering his hair to his face. The manor loomed behind them, a monument to madness, as they hurried toward the station. the weight of the coming battle heavy on their shoulders. The journey back to London was tense, the train's motion a stark contrast to the chaos they'd escaped. Holmes studied the control box, its coordinates pointing to a warehouse near the palace, a staging ground for Morvath's plan. Watson tended to Veluti, administering what aid he could with a medical kit scavenged from the manor. The puppeteer's strength returned slowly, his memories fragmented but intact. "I tried to resist," Veluti whispered. "The machine. It pulls at your soul. Rest, Maestro," Watson said gently. "You're safe now." Holmes, however, was far from reassured. "Morvath's puppet is still out there, Watson. A machine that mimics life is dangerous enough, but one that mimics a man's will, that's a weapon." He pocketed the control box, his mind racing. "We have 2 days until the gala. We must prepare." The chapter's events unfolded over hours, but their implications stretched far beyond. Holmes and Watson had saved Veluti, but the Order's shadow lingered, its leader still at large with a creation that could deceive the world. As the train rattled toward London, the storm outside mirrored the storm within Holmes' mind, a puzzle half solved, a threat half defeated, and a city on the brink of a spectacle that could change everything. Chapter 8. The Gala Gambit. The night was alive with the hum of anticipation as Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson stepped from their hansom cab onto the cobblestoned approach to Buckingham Palace. The grand edifice loomed before them, its golden stone facade bathed in the glow of gaslights that flickered like stars against the velvet darkness of the London sky. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves and the distant tang of the Thames. But Holmes' sharp senses were attuned to something far more pressing, the imminent threat of Dr. Morvath's plan. Poised to unfold within the palace's opulent halls, the royal gala, a glittering affair attended by the city's elite, was the stage for Morvath's audacious scheme. Invitations to such an event were rare, reserved for nobility, dignitaries, and those with influence enough to sway the tides of power. Holmes had secured their entry through a discreet favor from Mycroft, his brother, whose shadowy connections in the government opened doors even the great detective could not breach. Alone, Watson, dressed in his finest evening attire, a black tailcoat and crisp white shirt, felt the weight of the occasion, his nerves taut as he adjusted his cuffs. Holmes, by contrast, was the picture of calm, his lean frame clad in a tailored suit, his hawk-like eyes scanning the crowd as they ascended the grand staircase. "Keep your wits about you, Watson," Holmes murmured, his voice low as they passed through the arched entrance, where liveried footmen stood like statues. "Morvath is no fool. He will have anticipated our presence. We must assume every shadow hides a trap." Watson nodded, his hand brushing the reassuring weight of the revolver concealed beneath his coat. "Do you think he'll show himself, Holmes? Or will he rely on that infernal puppet to do his bidding?" "The puppet is his masterpiece," Holmes replied, his gaze darting to the chandeliers above, their crystal prisms scattering light across the marble floor. "But Morvath is a man of ego. He will want to witness his triumph firsthand. We must find the puppet before he unveils it and before it can do whatever he intends." The grand ballroom was a spectacle of wealth and refinement. Ladies in silk gowns glided across the floor, their jewels catching the light, while gentlemen in starched collars discussed politics and trade over glasses of champagne. A string quartet played a lilting waltz, the notes weaving through the murmur of conversation. Yet, beneath the elegance, Holmes sensed an undercurrent of tension, as if the room itself held its breath, waiting for the curtain to rise on Morvath's sinister performance. They moved through the crowd, Holmes' eyes flicking from face to face, searching for any sign of their quarry. He noted the positions of the guards, their ceremonial uniforms belying their readiness, and the exits, grand double doors to the north, a smaller side entrance to the east, and a servant's passage discreetly tucked behind a velvet curtain. Watson, ever the soldier, mirrored his vigilance, his gaze sweeping the room for any hint of the unnatural, the telltale stiffness of a puppet masquerading as a man-dot. It was Holmes who first spotted the anomaly. Near the center of the ballroom, a figure stood apart from the throng, its posture too perfect, its movements too precise. Clad in a tailored suit that mirrored Veluti's own style, it mingled with the guests, its face obscured by the crowd. But Holmes' keen eyes caught the subtle tells, the faint jerk of a limb, the unnatural smoothness of a turn, the way its hand lingered too long in a gesture, as if guided by invisible strings. "There," Holmes whispered, nodding toward the figure, the puppet. "Observe the way it moves to deliberate system, deliberate, not a living thing. It's a machine, Watson, and a devilishly clever one at that." Watson's eyes widened slightly, but he kept his focus on the crowd, trusting Holmes' instincts. "What's the plan, then?" "We observe first," Holmes said, his voice barely above a murmur. "We must confirm it's the Veluti replica and determine its purpose. Stay close, but don't draw attention. Morvath's agents will be watching." They edged closer, weaving through the crowd with practiced ease. Holmes' mind raced, piecing together the fragments of the case. The Order of the Saffron Veil had funded Veluti's experiments to create a puppet that could capture human essence, a machine that could mimic not just appearance but behavior, memory, even personality. The blueprint they'd recovered from the warehouse suggested a device powered by a combination of clockwork precision and an experimental energy source rumored to be derived from rare minerals. If Morvath had succeeded, this puppet could be more than a mere automaton. It could be a weapon capable of deception at the highest levels. As they approached, the puppet turned, and for a moment Watson's breath caught. It was Veluti, or rather, an uncanny likeness. The face was a perfect replica, down to the sharp cheekbones and expressive eyes, but those eyes glinted with an unnatural sheen, like polished glass. It was engaged in conversation with a portly duke, its gestures fluid yet slightly off, as if rehearsed to the point of perfection. Holmes noted the way it tilted its head, the precise angle of its smile, too calculated, too deliberate. "Remarkable," Holmes muttered, his fingers twitching as if itching to dissect the thing then and there, but flawed. "Watch the left." Hand it hesitates before each gesture, as if awaiting a signal. Watson squinted, catching the faint delay. "You're right. It's subtle, but it's there. How do we stop it without causing a scene?" "We don't," Holmes said. "Not yet. We need to know Morvath's endgame. If he plans to use this puppet to influence the gala's guests, perhaps to sway policy or extract secrets, he'll need to be close to control it. Find Morvath, and we find the puppet's leash." They split up, Holmes drifting toward the western side of the ballroom, where a raised dais held a small stage for performances, while Watson circled toward the refreshment tables, where gossip flowed as freely as the wine. Holmes' mind was a whirlwind of deductions. The puppet's presence suggested a public demonstration likely to impress or intimidate someone of importance. The guest list included foreign ambassadors, industrial magnates, and even a minor royal, any of whom could be Morvath's target. The Order's obsession with control through mechanical art hinted at a broader agenda, perhaps to destabilize alliances or secure funding for their forbidden technology. Holmes paused near a marble pillar, his eyes scanning the crowd. A flicker of movement caught his attention, a man in a black cloak, lingering near a side door, his face half hidden by a mask. Not a costume mask, but one of saffron silk, the mark of the Order. Holmes' pulse quickened, but he kept his expression neutral, signaling Watson with a subtle tilt of his head. Watson rejoined him, his face flushed from the heat of the room. "Anything?" he whispered. "Morvath or one of his lieutenants," Holmes replied, nodding toward the cloaked figure. "He's watching the puppet. Follow my lead, but be ready for trouble." They moved as one, their steps casual to avoid suspicion. The cloaked figure slipped through the side door, and Holmes followed, Watson close behind. The door led to a narrow corridor, dimly lit by flickering gas lamps, the walls adorned with gilded portraits of past monarchs. The air grew cooler, the sounds of the gala muffled as they descended a spiral staircase into the palace's lower levels. The corridor opened into a service area where crates of wine and supplies were stacked haphazardly. The cloaked figure paused ahead, unaware of their pursuit, and adjusted something beneath his cloak, a small device, its surface glinting with metallic components. Holmes' eyes narrowed. It was likely the control mechanism for the puppet. A compact version of the machine they'd found in the warehouse. "Careful, Watson," Holmes whispered. "If he activates a failsafe, the puppet could become unpredictable." They crept closer, using the shadows for cover. The figure turned, revealing a gaunt face and sharp eyes, Dr. Morvath himself. Holmes recognized him from a fleeting encounter years ago when Morvath was still a respected scientist, before his obsession with forbidden technology led to his disgrace. Now his expression was one of manic determination, his fingers dancing over the device. Holmes sprang forward, his cane raised like a rapier. "Morvath, stand down," he barked, his voice cutting through the silence. Morvath spun, his eyes wild. "Holmes, you're too late. The performance has begun." Before Holmes could close the distance, Morvath pressed a button on the device. A low hum filled the air, and from above, a scream echoed through the palace. Watson cursed, drawing his revolver as they raced back up the stairs, Morvath vanishing into a side passage. They burst into the ballroom to find chaos unfolding. The veluti puppet had climbed onto the dais, its movements jerky yet purposeful, as if fighting its own programming. Guests recoiled as it raised an arm, its hand unfolding to reveal a hidden compartment. A metallic glint suggested a weapon, perhaps a dart or blade, rigged to fire. Holmes' mind raced. A public assassination. Would Sao panic, discredit the Crown's security, and elevate the Order's influence? Watson, the chandelier. Holmes shouted, pointing to the massive crystal fixture above the dais. "Shoot the chain." Watson didn't hesitate. His revolver barked, the shot precise, severing the chain's weakest link. The chandelier plummeted, crashing onto the dais, with a deafening roar, pinning the puppet beneath a cascade of crystal and iron. Guests screamed, scattering as guards rushed forward, their sabers drawn. Holmes scanned the room, spotting Morveth near the northern doors, slipping through the crowd. After him, he called, already moving. The chase led through the palace's grand halls, past tapestries and marble statues, Morvath's cloak billowing like a phantom's. He was fast, but Holmes was relentless, his long legs closing the gap. Watson, panting but determined, kept pace, his revolver still in hand. Morveth darted into a gallery lined with ancestral portraits, his device now discarded, suggesting he'd activated a final command. Holmes tackled him against a wall, pinning his arms as Watson caught up. "It's over, Morveth," Holmes said, his voice cold as steel. "Your machine is destroyed, your order exposed." Morveth laughed, a brittle, unhinged sound. "You think this ends with me?" The puppet was a prototype. "There are others, Holmes, others you'll never find." Holmes tightened his grip, but before he could press further, a guard's shout echoed from the hall. Reinforcements had arrived, drawn by the chaos. Holmes handed Morveth over, his mind already turning to the puppet, or what was left of it. Back in the ballroom, the chandelier's wreckage was being cleared, the puppet's remains a tangle of wood, wire, and shattered porcelain. But as Holmes examined the debris, his heart sank. The puppet's core, the mechanism that powered its uncanny life, was gone, likely retrieved by one of Morvath's agents in the chaos. The gala was safe, the guests unharmed, but the Order's technology had slipped through his fingers. As the night drew to a close, Holmes and Watson stood on the palace steps, the cool air a balm after the frenzy. "We stopped him, Holmes," Watson said, his voice weary but firm. "That's a victory." "For now," Holmes replied, his eyes on the horizon, where London's lights flickered like distant stars. "But the puppet is out there, Watson. And where there's system, there's a machine. The Order will try again." He lit a cigarette, the flame casting a brief glow on his sharp features. "We've bought time, nothing more. Let's return to Baker Street. There's work yet to be done." The cab ride back was silent, the weight of the missing puppet heavy on their minds. Holmes stared out the window, his thoughts a tangle of possibilities, each one darker than the last. The Order of the Saffron Veil was wounded, not broken, and their next move was already in motion, hidden in the shadows of a city that never slept. The gala had been a battlefield of wits, and though they'd won the day, the war was far from over. Holmes leaned back, exhaling a plume of smoke, his mind already dissecting the next clue, the next thread in the web of the Order's ambitions. The puppet was gone, but its legacy lingered, a ghost in the machine, waiting to take the stage once more. Chapter 9. The Puppeteer's Legacy. Fog hung low over London, draping the city in a shroud of gray that muffled the clatter of hooves and the distant cries of street vendors. Sherlock Holmes sat by the window of 221B Baker Street, his sharp eyes scanning the street below, though his mind was elsewhere, piecing together the threads of the case that had consumed him for weeks. Dr. John Watson, seated at the cluttered desk, scribbled notes, his pen scratching rhythmically against the paper. The room was warm, the fire crackling in the hearth, but a chill lingered in the air, as though the shadows of Maestro Enrico Velludi's ordeal still clung to them. Holmes had not spoken for nearly an hour, his fingers steepled beneath his chin, his pipe unlit but clutched tightly. Watson knew this mood Holmes was on the cusp of a breakthrough, or perhaps wrestling with a detail that refused to align. The puppet, Velludi's mechanical doppelganger, was still missing. and with it, the dangerous technology that had nearly cost the puppeteer his life. Morvath's arrest at the Royal Gala had been a victory, but an incomplete one. The puppet's disappearance, not at Holmes, a loose end in a case that had already unraveled a secret society and a mad scientist's ambition. "Watson," Holmes said abruptly, breaking the silence, "we must assume the puppet is not merely a curiosity, but a commodity. Its absence from the gala suggests it was spirited away deliberately, likely by someone with means and motive. We are dealing with a network, not a single rogue." Watson set down his pen, his brow furrowing. "A network? You mean the Order of the Saffron Veil has more members still at large?" "Possibly," Holmes replied, rising and pacing the room. "But the Order was a means, not an end. Their obsession with controlling life through mechanical art was funded by wealthier hands collectors, perhaps, who see Velludi's creation as the pinnacle of their perverse desires. The puppet is a prize, Watson, and I suspect it is already on the market." Holmes stopped by the mantel, retrieving a small, folded piece of paper from a tin box. It was a scrap torn from a ledger found in Morvath's possession, overlooked by the police but not by Holmes' keen eye. The paper listed names, dates, and sums transactions, but not for ordinary goods. The final entry, scrawled in haste, mentioned a black orchid auction, a name that had surfaced in whispers among London's underworld. The Black Orchid, Holmes mused, his voice low. A clandestine auction house for the elite, dealing in items too rare or too dangerous for public sale. If the puppet is anywhere, it will be there. Watson leaned forward, intrigued. "And where is this auction held? Surely not in plain sight." Holmes' lips twitched in a faint smile. "Nothing in this case has been in plain sight, my dear Watson. But I have my sources. The auction is tomorrow night, in a derelict manor on the outskirts of Whitechapel. We shall attend, not as ourselves, but as players in their game." The following evening, under a moonless sky, Holmes and Watson stepped from a hansom cab onto a muddy lane leading to Blackthorn Manor. Holmes had transformed himself into Mr. Silas Mortimer, a reclusive antiquarian with a penchant for esoteric artifacts. His face was altered with subtle makeup, a false mustache, a scar across one cheek, and spectacles that dulled his piercing gaze. Watson, less convincingly, adopted the role of Mr. Henry Carver, Mortimer's assistant, his military bearing softened by a slouch and a nervous fidget. Their disguises were imperfect, but the dim light and the secrecy of the event would, Holmes hoped, shield them from scrutiny. The manor loomed ahead, its windows dark save for a faint glow from the upper floors. A liveried servant, his face half hidden by a hood, checked their forged invitation, a masterpiece of Holmes' craftsmanship, and ushered them inside. The interior was a stark contrast to the crumbling facade. Opulent chandeliers cast golden light over velvet drapes, and the air was thick with the scent of cigar smoke and expensive perfume. Men and women in masks mingled, their voices hushed, their eyes darting with the wariness of those who trafficked in forbidden things. Holmes scanned the room, his gaze settling on a raised platform at the far end, where a crimson curtain concealed the auction's treasures. "Stay close, Watson," he murmured, "and keep your revolver at hand. These are not mere collectors, they are vultures." The auction began with a flourish. The auctioneer, a gaunt man with a voice like silk presenting relics of dubious origin, a jade idol said to curse its owner, a clockwork bird that sang prophecies, a dagger allegedly stained with royal blood. Holmes watched the bidders, noting their mannerisms, their wealth, their desperation. One figure, cloaked in black with a silver mask, bit aggressively, their gloved hands steady but their posture tense. Holmes leaned toward Watson. "That one," he whispered. "They know more than they let on." When the curtain parted to reveal the final lot, a gasp rippled through the room. There it was, Veluti's puppet, its lifelike features uncanny under the chandelier's glow. Its eyes, carved from some luminous stone, seemed to follow the crowd, and its limbs hung with a stillness that suggested dormant power. The auctioneer's voice rose, extolling its craftsmanship, its rumored ability to house a human soul. The bids climbed rapidly, reaching sums that made Watson's head spin. Holmes, as Silas Mortimer entered the fray, his bids calculated to draw attention without dominating. He wanted to see who would fight hardest for the puppet and why. The silver-masked bidder countered each offer, their voice muffled but commanding. Others dropped out, cowed by the escalating price or the masked figure's intensity. Holmes pushed higher, his tone calm, but his eyes locked on his rival. At last, the silver-masked bidder slammed a fist on their table, shouting a sum that silenced the room. The auctioneer hesitated, then declared the lot sold. Holmes noted the bidder's immediate retreat toward a side door, followed by two burly men in dark coats. "Watson," he said quietly, "we follow them, now." They slipped through the crowd, dodging servants and guests, and trailed the trio into a dimly lit corridor. The manor's labyrinthine layout worked to their advantage, allowing them to stay unseen. The silver-masked figure led the way to a locked room where the puppet was delivered by a nervous attendant. Holmes, peering through a keyhole, saw the bidder remove their mask, revealing a woman with sharp features and cold eyes, Lady Eleanor Voss, a name from Morvath's ledger, a collector rumored to fund illicit experiments. Voss inspected the puppet, her fingers tracing its face with reverence. "It's perfect," she murmured to her companions. "Morvath was a fool, but his work will serve us. The machine will be ours." Holmes signaled Watson to retreat, but a floorboard creaked underfoot. Voss's head snapped up, and her men drew weapons. "Intruders," she hissed. Holmes and Watson bolted, the manor's corridors a maze of shadows and echoes. Shots rang out, splintering wood. But Holmes' knowledge of such places, gleaned from years of chasing criminals through London's underbelly, guided them to a servant's exit. Outside, the fog enveloped them, a temporary shield. Holmes' mind raced. "Voss is not the mastermind," he said, catching his breath. "She's a buyer, but someone else orchestrated this." "The puppet is rigged." Watson and I saw a faint glow in its chest, a mechanism not unlike the explosives we've encountered before. "We must act before it's activated." The next day, Holmes dove into his network of informants, from street urchins to disgraced nobles, piecing together Voss's connections. She was linked to a syndicate of collectors, each with a stake in Veluti's technology. The puppet, they learned, was to be transported to a private estate in Kent for a demonstration, a test of its rumored consciousness-transferring capabilities. Holmes suspected the demonstration was a trap, either to eliminate rivals or to unleash the puppet's destructive potential. Disguised once more, this time as laborers, Holmes and Watson infiltrated the estate under the guise of delivering supplies. The grounds were heavily guarded, with men patrolling in pairs, their eyes sharp. The puppet was kept in a glass-domed conservatory, surrounded by scientific equipment and guarded by Voss herself. Holmes observed from a distance, noting the wires and vials connected to the puppet, confirming his fear. It was rigged with a chemical explosive, likely triggered by a remote mechanism. "We cannot seize it now," Holmes whispered. "Too many guards, but if we can disable the trigger, we can buy time." Watson nodded, his hand on his revolver. "What's the plan?" Holmes outlined a strategy. Watson would create a diversion by tampering with the estate's gas lamps, causing a minor explosion to draw the guards. Holmes would slip into the conservatory, disarm the puppet, and secure it before Voss could act. It was risky, but they had faced worse. As night fell, Watson executed his part flawlessly, igniting a gas lamp with a timed fuse that sent flames licking up a trellis. The guards rushed to the scene, shouting orders, while Holmes moved like a shadow, picking the conservatory's lock with practiced ease. Inside, the puppet sat on a pedestal, its eyes glinting in the moonlight. Holmes worked quickly, his tools probing the puppet's chest cavity. He found the explosive, a glass vial of volatile chemicals, wired to a clockwork timer set to detonate in hours. His fingers moved with precision, but Voss's voice cut through the silence. "I knew you'd come, Mr. Holmes." She stood in the doorway, a pistol in hand, her eyes gleaming with triumph. "You're too late. The puppet is mine, and its power will reshape the world." Holmes didn't look up, his hand steady. "You mistake ambition for control, Lady Voss. This puppet is a bomb, nothing more. Your syndicate will be its first victims." Voss laughed, stepping closer. "You think you can outwit us? The timer is set, and the trigger is beyond your reach." Holmes' eyes flicked to the puppet's base, where a faint wire led to a hidden panel. "Is it?" he said, and with a flick of his wrist he severed the wire, stopping the timer with seconds to spare. Voss lunged, but Watson, having dispatched the guards, burst through a side door, tackling her to the ground. The puppet was secured, its explosive core removed, and Voss was bound, her plans in ruins. The aftermath was swift. Holmes delivered Voss and her accomplices to Scotland Yard, along with evidence of the syndicate's dealings. The puppet, stripped of its dangerous mechanisms, was destroyed in a controlled fire, its ashes scattered to ensure no trace of Velludi's forbidden technology remained. Velludi himself, recovering in a quiet London hospital, thanked Holmes with a weary nod, his hands trembling as he swore never to craft such a machine again. Back at 221B, Holmes sat by the fire, his pipe now lit, the smoke curling toward the ceiling. Watson, finishing his account of the adventure, looked up. "Do you think we've truly ended it, Holmes? The Order, the Syndicate, there could be others." Holmes exhaled, his eyes distant. "There are always others, Watson. But for now, the stage is clear, and the puppeteer is free. That is enough." The firelight danced on the walls, casting shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. But Holmes paid them no mind. The case was closed, and London, for one night, was at peace. Chapter 10. The final curtain fog hung low over Baker Street, curling around the lampposts like the tendrils of some spectral hand. Inside the familiar confines of 221B, Sherlock Holmes sat by the fire, his long fingers steepled beneath his chin, his eyes fixed on the flickering flames. The room was a sanctuary of ordered chaos, books piled haphazardly on the mantel, chemical vials glinting in the dim light, and the faint scent of tobacco lingering in the air. Dr. John Watson, seated across from him, scribbled notes in his journal. the scratch of his pen a steady rhythm against the quiet. The case of Maestro Enrico Velluti, the vanished puppeteer, had drawn to a close, yet its echoes lingered in Watson's mind. The Order of the Saffron Veil, with its sinister obsession for mechanical life, had been dismantled. Dr. Morveth, the disgraced scientist, languished in a cell, his dreams of animating human essence through forbidden technology thwarted. The Velluti puppet, that uncanny replica, had been destroyed by Holmes' own hand, its dangerous mechanism reduced to ash. And yet, as Watson glanced at his friend, he sensed an undercurrent of unease in Holmes' stillness, a sign that the detective's mind was not yet at rest. "Holmes," Watson began, setting his pen down, "you've been uncommonly quiet since we returned from the auction. The case is solved, is it not? Velluti is safe, the Order is no more, and that infernal puppet is gone. What troubles you?" Holmes' lips twitched into a faint smile, though. His eyes remained on the fire. "You mistake contemplation for trouble, my dear Watson. The case is indeed resolved, but the world is never so tidy as to present only one mystery at a time. There are always threads left dangling, waiting to be pulled." Watson frowned, leaning forward. "Threads? You mean the letter?" Holmes' gaze flicked to the side table, where a single envelope rested, its edges slightly crumpled. It had arrived that morning, delivered by a boy who vanished into the fog before Mrs. Hudson could question him. The letter was written in a precise, unfamiliar hand, its contents cryptic. The veil is torn, but the stage remains. "Look to the shadows, Mr. Holmes, for the next act begins." No signature, no address, only a faint embossing of a crescent. Moon at the paper's edge. "It is suggestive," Holmes said, rising abruptly and crossing to the table. He lifted the letter, holding it to the light as if it might reveal some hidden truth. "The phrasing is deliberate, theatrical. The crescent. Moon is a symbol I have not encountered in this context, but it hints at an organization or perhaps a single mind playing a longer game." Watson's brow furrowed. "Another secret society? Surely not so soon after the Order." Holmes chuckled softly, a rare sound that carried both amusement and warning. "The world is full of those who hide in plain sight, Watson. The Order of the Saffron Veil was but one thread in a larger tapestry. This letter suggests someone else is pulling strings, and I do not intend to be caught unawares." Before Watson could respond, a sharp rap at the door broke the silence. Mrs. Hudson entered, her face a mix of exasperation and curiosity. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, there's a gentleman downstairs insisting on seeing you. Says his name is Mr. Percival Gray, and he won't take no for an answer. Something about a performance at the Lyceum tonight." Holmes' eyes gleamed. "Gray, you say?" "The theatrical manager who took over Velluti's shows after his disappearance. Interesting timing." "Show him up, Mrs. Hudson." Moments later, Percival Gray entered, a wiry man with a nervous energy that seemed to vibrate through his tailored suit. His mustache twitched as he spoke, his hands clutching a leather satchel. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, I apologize for the intrusion, but I'm in dire need of your expertise. It's Maestro Velluti. He's insisted on performing one last show tonight, a charity event at the Grand Lyceum. But I've received threats, anonymous notes warning that the performance must not go on." Holmes leaned forward, his interest piqued. "Threats? Describe them." Gray fumbled in his satchel, producing a folded note. "This arrived at the theater this morning. It's the third in as many days." Holmes took the note, unfolding it with care. The handwriting matched the letter on his table, down to the crescent moon embossed at the bottom. The message was, "Stark, cancel the puppeteer's final act, or the stage will burn." "Curious," Holmes murmured, passing the note to Watson. The same hand, the same symbol. "Tell me, Mr. Gray, what is the nature of this performance?" Gray swallowed, his eyes darting to the window as if expecting to see a figure in the fog. "It's a simple marionette show, nothing like Veluti's earlier work. He's sworn off the complex mechanisms, says he wants to return to the art's roots, wooden puppets, honest strings. It's for the benefit of the East End orphans. Half of London's gentry will be there, including some rather prominent figures." Holmes' gaze sharpened. "Prominent figures. Names, Mr. Gray." "The Earl of Danvers, Lady Margaret St. Clair, and—" "Well, there's talk that someone from the royal household might attend, though it's not confirmed." Holmes exchanged a glance with Watson, who felt a familiar thrill at the prospect of a new challenge. "Very well," Holmes said, rising. "We shall attend the performance, Mr. Gray. Ensure Maestro Veluti is protected, and say nothing of these threats to the public. Discretion is paramount." Gray nodded, relief flooding his face. "Thank you, Mr. Holmes. I knew you'd understand." As Gray departed, Watson stood, reaching for his coat. "You think this is connected to the letter, don't you?" "Another move by whoever sent it." Holmes donned his deerstalker, his expression unreadable. "The timing is no coincidence, Watson. The stage is set, and we are players in a game we do not yet fully understand. Come, let us see what shadows lurk behind the curtain." The Grand Lyceum Theatre glowed under the gaslights, its facade a beacon in the foggy London night. The auditorium buzzed with anticipation, the audience a mix of silk-clad aristocrats and curious onlookers, all eager to see Maestro Veluti's final bow. Holmes and Watson took their seats in a private box, offering a clear view of the stage and the crowd. Below, Holmes' eyes scanned the faces, noting every detail. The nervous fidgeting of a man in the third row, the overly attentive stare of a woman in a velvet cloak, the subtle exchange of glances between two footmen near the stage. Veluti appeared, his frail frame a stark contrast to the commanding presence he once held. The audience hushed as he raised his hands, the marionettes, simple wooden figures with painted faces springing to life. The performance was a tale of a wandering knight, his strings dancing with a grace that belied their simplicity. Watson found himself captivated, the story unfolding with a quiet magic that needed no forbidden technology. Holmes, however, was not watching the puppets. His gaze darted to the wings, where a shadow moved, a flicker too deliberate to be accidental. He leaned toward Watson, his voice low. "Keep your eyes on the stage, but be ready. Something is amiss." As the night puppet faced a dragon, a faint creak sounded from above. Holmes' head snapped up, his eyes narrowing at the catwalk high above the stage. A figure, cloaked and hooded, moved swiftly along the narrow platform, a glint of metal in their hand. Holmes was out of his seat in an instant, motioning for Watson to follow. They slipped through a side door, climbing a narrow staircase to the catwalk. The air was thick with dust and the scent of oil, the stage lights casting long shadows. Holmes moved with the precision of a predator, his steps silent. At the far end of the catwalk, the figure crouched, tampering with a rigging mechanism. A rope, taut with the weight of a heavy sandbag, hung perilously above the stage. "Stop!" Holmes called, his voice sharp. The figure spun, their face obscured by a mask bearing the crescent moon symbol. They hurled a knife, which Holmes dodged with a fluid sidestep. The figure bolted, leaping to a lower platform with alarming agility. Holmes pursued, Watson close behind, their footsteps echoing in the theater's rafters. The chase led through a maze of ropes and pulleys, the figure weaving through the machinery with practiced ease. Holmes, undeterred, anticipated their path, cutting them off at a narrow junction. The figure lunged, but Holmes seized their wrist, twisting until the knife clattered to the floor. Watson pinned the figure against a beam, revealing a young woman, her eyes blazing with defiance. "Who sent you?" Holmes demanded, his voice cold. She smirked, her accent tinged with something foreign, Italian perhaps. "You think you've won, Mr. Holmes. The stage is larger than you know." Before Holmes could press further, a scream rose from the auditorium. The sandbag, loosened during the struggle, plummeted toward the stage. Holmes shoved the woman into Watson's grip and sprinted to the edge of the catwalk. Below, Velluti stood frozen, unaware of the danger. Holmes seized a loose rope, swinging down with the grace of an acrobat, and tackled Velluti out of harm's way as the sandbag crashed onto the stage, splintering the boards. The audience erupted in panic, but Holmes was already moving, dragging Velluti to safety. Watson, still holding the woman, called out, "Holmes, she's slipping." The woman twisted free, vanishing into the shadows of the theater's underbelly. Holmes, panting, waved Watson off. "Let her go. We have what we need." Velluti, trembling, clutched Holmes' arm. "They'll never stop, will they? Even now, they want my art destroyed." Holmes' expression soft, a rare moment of empathy. "Your art is safe, maestro, and so are you. Come, let us get you to safety." Back at 221B, the fire burned low, casting long shadows across the room. Velluti sat wrapped in a blanket, sipping brandy, his hands still shaking. The performance had been canceled, the theater evacuated, and the police summoned to investigate. The sabotage. Holmes paced, his mind racing through the night's events. The woman was no mere hired thug, he said, pausing by the window. Her skill, her knowledge of the theater's layout, it suggests training, perhaps from a rival faction of the order, or something new entirely. Watson, nursing a bruise from the scuffle, frowned. "And the crescent moon? It's the same as the letter." "Do you think it's a new society?" Holmes nodded slowly. "Or a remnant of the old one, rebranded?" "The Order of the Saffron Veil was funded by powerful men, Watson. Men do not abandon their obsession so easily." Velluti spoke, his voice hoarse. "I thought it was over. I thought I could perform one last time, give something back to the world. But they'll never let me be." Holmes turned, his eyes sharp. "You will perform again, maestro, if that is your wish. But first, we must root out this threat. The crescent moon is our clue, and I intend to follow it." The next morning, Holmes dispatched telegrams to his network of informants, from the street urchins of Whitechapel to the archivists of the British Museum. The crescent moon symbol, he learned, had surfaced in whispers across Europe, a mark tied to a shadowy group known as the Lunari, collectors of forbidden knowledge and artifacts. Their motives were unclear, but their reach was vast. Spanning from Venice to Vienna, Holmes and Watson spent days combing through records, visiting dusty libraries and smoky taverns. A pattern emerged. The Lunari had an interest in veluties. Work, not for its art, but for its potential to blur the line between man and machine. The woman from the catwalk, identified through a police sketch as Elena Rossi, was a known operative, a thief, and spy with ties to Venice's underworld. "She's a pawn," Holmes said, pinning a map of Europe to the wall. "The real question is who moves her." Their search led them to a derelict bookshop in Soho, rumored to be a Lunari meeting point. Disguised as a rare book collector, Holmes infiltrated the shop, finding a hidden room filled with diagrams of Veluti's consciousness transfer. Machine. A ledger listed names wealthy patrons, scientists, even a disgraced noble from the Order of the Saffron Veil. The Lunari, it seemed, were not a new society, but a splinter group. Determined to resurrect the Order's work. As Holmes copied the ledger, a floorboard creaked. He spun, narrowly avoiding a dart that embedded itself in the wall. Elena Rossi stood in the doorway, her mask gone, her face a mask of cold determination. "You're persistent, Mr. Holmes," she said, "but you're chasing ghosts." Holmes smiled thinly. "Ghosts leave traces, Miss Rossi, and I am very good at finding them." She lunged, but Holmes was ready, using a bookcase to block her path. A brief struggle ended with Rossi escaping through a hidden panel, leaving behind a single clue, a ticket to a steamer bound for Venice. "Venice," Holmes said, his eyes alight. "The heart of the Lunari. Watson, pack your bags." "We're not done yet." But Watson hesitated. "Holmes, Veluti is safe. The puppet is destroyed. Can we not let this rest?" Holmes' gaze softened, but his resolve was iron. "The stage is never truly empty, Watson. Not while there are those who would pull the strings." The steamer cut through the waves, bound for Venice. Holmes stood at the rail, the crescent moon reflected in the water below. Watson joined him, the weight of their adventure settling on his shoulders. "Do you think we'll ever be free of these societies?" Watson asked. Holmes' lips quirked. "As long as men seek power over life itself, there will be those who weave shadows. But we, Watson, are the light that finds them." Back in London, Veluti performed his charity show a week later under heavy guard. The marionettes danced, their strings free of malice, their movements a testament to simple beauty. The audience applauded, unaware of the battle fought in their name. At 221B, Watson completed his account of the case, his pen pausing as he considered the letter still tucked in Holmes' drawer. The Lunari waited, their shadows long and patient. But for now the fire burned bright, and Holmes lit his pipe, the smoke curling like a puppet's strings, dancing in the quiet triumph of a case well closed.